Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 54 of the Former Action Guys podcast, and I'm your host, Justin Kramer. This week I have David Armstrong on. He is a former artillery officer, came in 1990, talks about how he came in and his class of artillery officers were thinking that they were going to leave school early and go into the Gulf War, but he had just missed out on that. So he talks about being there for that whole experience. And then he was in Mogadishu. So he talks about his experience in Mogadishu and some of the missions that they were running out there, and how as a kind of unexperienced yet slightly experienced young officer, he was controlling fires and doing some of the deconfliction work that was happening in Mogadishu. So that's a really great story. We talk about his time at First ANGLICO. He was at First ANGLICO in the 90s, so he talks about some of the stuff they did there. He knew people like John Dillard and stuff, so that's cool to hear him talk about, these legends that some of us know. For those that may not, the first 30 minutes is him and I talking about making podcasts and stuff, because he wanted to kind of get into that a little bit. So if you don't want to hear anything about just in general topic making podcast, I would skip past the first 30 minutes or so. I don't know the exact timeline. I'd have to look it up, but I would skip past that, and then you'll get into the more specific military stuff. But overall, it's a really good conversation. And just some of the stories he's got and some of the stuff he's did, and we didn't even touch on everything. Super interesting. So I think everyone's going to enjoy it. Hey, as always, make sure to check out my website, jkramergraphics.com. My Instagram's at jkramergraphics. And my other Instagram is Former Action Guys. So make sure to hit me up on one of those platforms, subscribe, follow, leave comments in the YouTube section or in the YouTube videos. If you haven't been on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Former Action Guys on YouTube. And other than that, enjoy. Now I'm already recording and everything. Everything's going on my end.
Good. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of shit. Now right after I got done saying we're not going to talk about the podcast, we'll talk about the podcast. But that's one of the cool things about the podcast, right? Is that you can do it over. I mean, you can post everything out. You can do all kinds of stuff.
You can do a lot of editing. I try not to edit too much. I try to, if it's a name, someone says a name and they're like talking about them like negatively, but it's not like a common name, I'll edit it out. Like if it's a common name, like if someone says like Ski's an asshole, well, there's a million Skis in the Marine Corps. So like, who knows what Ski that guy is, but
right.
For the most part, I try to let it run. Or if guys need to go to the bathroom, obviously I'm going to cut out that dead time.
Right.
But
right.
I don't want to over edit it, just because there's some pros and cons to editing, right?
Right.
So a good example, we had talked about that Call Her Daddy podcast, right?
Right.
The way that the girl that runs that podcast, I don't remember her name.
There's Alex, and then the girl that just got tossed to the curb.
Yeah, Alex.
Sophia,
Sophia is the one that's not on it anymore. And for the listeners, I don't really watch the podcast, but I do follow their Instagram page because it's pretty entertaining. But she was talking about the editing that she does, and how they will sit there and record for 3 or 4 hours, and then she chops everything down to 2 hours.
Right.
So she cuts out that same podcast. Yeah. So she cuts out a lot of the kind of normal conversation, I guess, it's not really relevant, and to keep it at like the attention span of, the younger people. But, right. I don't like doing that. I don't want to edit like that. I think people like to hear the natural flow of the conversation. But yes, I can edit. That is a good thing about a podcast. You can do whatever you want,
right.
and there's a million ways to skin a cat. And some people, obviously the way she's doing it's successful for them.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole podcasting thing is so interesting to me. And we were talking earlier about some of just the business aspects of it. And just how I just think it's going to become such a dominant medium because of the choice that it provides everybody, right? So like, I can listen to a very niche podcast about former action guys, right? I can listen to something about the military guys, and I can shift over and listen to an interview with Robert Mueller, and then I can listen to some crime drama or whatever on my own time. In anything I want to, I can put my headset in, and it could be while I'm in the backseat of a car, or I'm on a plane, or when I'm driving somewhere, or whatever it is. And so just that your ability to segment and choose when and where and what you're listening to, I think it's just going to drive an adoption of this medium that I don't think people are really aware of yet. And that Joe Rogan thing is such a great example because, that guy got $100 million deal, right? $100 million. a fucking year, dude. That's like
That's crazy.
that's Howard Stern money, right?
Is
And
that a year or was that no? That's a one-time amount. Either way,
oh,
$100 million is
yeah. I thought it was a year. So if I'm wrong on that, I stand corrected.
either
But
way. That's still a shit ton of money.
I know.
Especially like we had mentioned from the guy whose original sponsor was a pocket pussy, and now he's got $100 million deal from Spotify.
Yeah, and like I mean, basically his. I mean, the first time I think he was a stand-up comedian at some point, but I mean, really, the first time I ever heard his name was when he was the host on Fear Factor, and he was getting people to eat like centipedes on TV.
Yeah, I think that's where most people saw him from. Yeah,
liquids. Right now, he's got this right, and the other cool thing about it too is he doesn't work for a corporation. There is nobody over him that's telling him what he can and can't say, who he can't talk to. There's no corporate agenda. There's no suit there telling him what to do, and people are loving it, right? People are eating it up, and so it's an awesome medium.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's and it's something that's like expanding, as more Americans hear about it. It's almost like talk radio was. People love talk radio in the morning, like driving to and from work. It's just entertaining listening to people talk, even if it's about like just I don't know, just whatever. It's just entertaining, and everyone has that like talk radio station that they will listen to, and it's the same way, but now it's on demand rather than having to get up at 6 a.m. and drive to work and listen to them like that. I can just bring that kind of format anywhere. And it's unregulated, like you said. So some of these podcasts that, like mine, it's whatever I want to put on here. It's up to me. Like if I mess something up, it's on me, and if I do something great, it's on me. And I don't have anybody telling me like I have my dad telling me I shouldn't cuss so much because I sound unintelligent, But I told him I'm like, man, it's part of it's natural conversation,
Right.
And there's a time and place.
Yeah, if you had a different audience, right? Like you also have to remember, like, I mean, I don't know what your metrics are like, but I'm going to just make an assumption that a lot of the people that are listening to this are like, dudes that did what we did in the Marines.
Yeah.
And so we're used to talking like that. And it's funny because I don't even know that I'm cursing when I'm talking to my Marine buddies, but like I know it when I'm in my civilian job and I'm there's just something about the filter. I don't know. It's part of who we are too,
it's just part of the speech. Yeah. It's just
one
of those things.
It is. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. So like, it's funny. And I know we're going to ping pong around here a little bit, but like, one of the things that I do as a outside of my work, I'm not going to call it a hobby, but something I'm really passionate about, is, I work with a lot of transitioning veterans. Yeah. And that started off as just like my buddies who are coming up on their 26 to 28 year mark, or even their 20-year mark, and say like, hey, I'm thinking about getting out. Cause I was a reservist at the end. So I had this bifurcated career. Like I was a Marine and a civilian at the same time. So I could still relate to everything. I wasn't so far removed from the Marine Corps, but I had gone into the civilian world and actually started my own company. So my buddies would call me up and be like, hey, I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of that. And one of the things I tell transitioning veterans all the time is like, hey, there's like things that you're going to have to change about yourself that you haven't even thought twice about for the past 20 years. One of them is your language. Like, you just can't tell people to fuck off. I mean, you just can't. There's no knife handing in the civilian world.
Yeah.
There's no standing at attention in front of my desk or like lock your body. You can't do that stuff.
You can't tell somebody that's an idiot that they're an idiot,
That's right. Yeah. Right. And another thing I tell people all the time too is like, hey man, like, you can't just go walking into a boardroom meeting with a spit cup. Like you got to ditch that habit too.
Yeah.
So many little things that we're off tangent, but the podcast thing, I think, from a business perspective, and the other thing that's really cool too. And I know you've probably experienced this, maturity of your podcast as well, but like, I'll bet you the hardest podcast you ever did was the first one.
Man. So the first podcast, I was like sweating. I was drinking. I recorded the intro. Well, the first one wasn't bad. It was recording. Honestly, the first one was really actually pretty good. Me and Camino Emil sat down and recorded. And I went up to, that was the very beginning of my trip cross country last summer. I drove up to, he lives in San Francisco. So I had driven up to Yosemite and then camped out there. And then I camped along the Sonoma coast. And then I drove down and met up with him and re-recorded for like 3.5, 4 hours. now I would keep it all in one episode. That one I split in two, but now I'm like, there's only been one other episode that I split in two, and that's because I know if I split it in two, not as many people are going to go back to the second one. If they already listened to the first one and they stop halfway through and they're like, all right, that's enough. They don't go back to the second one, and that's unfortunate because the second episode is. I stopped it the second episode I stopped right when we started talking about, or I began right when we started talking about our time together in Sangin in Afghanistan as advisors. So the second episode is it was supposed to be the first episode is mostly all about him, and then the second episode was going to be he and I come together. But if I look at my stats, I can tell there's a significant drop from that first episode to the second episode, and then the third episode it picks back up. So I know people are skipping it because they think we're just going to continue on. So that's kind of unfortunate. But the first one, what got me was I drove cross country. I did all these interviews, and I recorded them so that I'd have some. I wanted to have a few. That way I could be consistent. I don't want to be every week oh shit, I got to rush and make one. And so I had 5 or 6 when I got back to California because I had interviewed guys all over the place. And then I came back and then I sat down to do the editing and then to make the intro. The intro for the first one was the hardest thing, I think, because there was no one else there. It was just me talking into the microphone, and I would start saying something, and I'm like, I sound like an idiot, and then I'd go back, and then I'd record again, and that sounds so stupid, or I'd mess up a word or something like that. I probably did the initial intro probably 15 times, and then actually on episode 35 or 40. I was I wonder how, sometimes you go back and you look how did I sound or how did I look back then? What was my editing like? How has the podcast bettered? So I was I'm going to go back and listen to episode 1 again. So I go back and listen to episode 1 and the intro was horrendous. It was the talking wasn't bad. What I was saying wasn't bad, but then I over edited the actual intro.
Yeah.
And it was all garbly sounding and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe people continued beyond that. I'm glad people did, And I actually went back and re-recorded the first one because I'm if people find my podcast and that's the first thing they hear, that's absolutely horrible. But that was, getting used to just talking by myself into the microphone when no one else is around was something that it took a little while. But now when I record the intro, we'll finish this interview, and then normally what I'll do is just roll right into the intro. I'll let you go and then be hey, welcome, and go right into my intro speech, and I'll get it on the first time, maybe 2 times if I mess up real bad in the middle of it. So,
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's becoming such a fascinating medium, and I'm talking as if I'm a podcaster, and I'm not, right? I'm just I've cut videos on my, for my business. I've done videos, and I've done, I've been a guest on podcasts, and we were talking yesterday, I'm in the middle of conceptualizing a couple of different podcast ideas. Mm-hmm. And what's really got me excited about this whole podcasting thing, and again, I haven't even started, right? But it's I can do it for my business. I can do one that's just a personal thing. I can do one that's in pursuit of maybe, writing a book. Mm-hmm. Or like Howard Stern is another great example of this. He's got that book, Howard Stern Comes Again, right? And I got it as a gift from a client, and I started looking at it. I'm he didn't really write anything, right? I think he wrote a foreword, but then all it was transcriptions of interviews that he did, which was fascinating. I loved reading some of the interviews. Yeah. All of a sudden, I'm here's this guy. He's got a book. He published. He probably got a lot of money from the publisher to do it. And he didn't do anything. All he did was transcribe interviews. And I'm well, there's an interesting business model or a side hustle or something like that.
And it's a nice long tail investment or money source right there.
Exactly. So I just think it's a really interesting medium, and it's exciting to see, you and some other guys really, getting into the podcasting scene and just, getting out there. And so the thing I love about your podcast is you and I didn't serve together. This is the first time we've ever seen each other face to face. And I feel I know you, and I love listening to the stories, right? I love, the last one I listened to was is it Chris Walker? Is that his first name? Major Chris Walker is ANGLICO. Yeah, right. So really enjoyed that podcast because he was talking about his career and how he ended up at ANGLICO. He's an artillery officer, so it was interesting for me to hear about what it's like to be an artillery officer these days. Yeah. And then he's got the civilian career going on the side, and then he was in the reserves, and I listen to and normally when I listen to a podcast, I'll do it at 1.25, 1.5 times just to kind of plow through it.
Oh, okay. I know people that do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that one I was like straight up one time, like I was into it.
That's
And
awesome.
so here I'm into something with two guys I don't even know. So I just think it speaks volumes about where this medium's going to go.
Yeah. No, it's cool. Chris Walker was on episode 28 also for those that want to hear it. I want to say he's still in the reserves now. I'd have to double check that, but he's also he's not an aspiring actor. He's an actor in New York. He's been in multiple shows like Blacklist. He was on Punisher, on Netflix and stuff like that. So that's a good episode for people to listen to if they're or looking to get into acting.
I thought it was cool.
But
I wish I was good. I wish I was good looking enough to be an actor.
Yeah. Right. But I know what you're saying. Like it's, honestly, anybody can make a podcast. You just pull your phone out and record it and then upload it. It's that easy. It's just, for me to get to the success I've had so far, which is, this isn't like, it hasn't blown up or anything, but I have a decent amount of people that follow it. I'm pushing up to almost, I think, 4,000 downloads a month. And I attribute that to having built a pretty big social media presence prior to doing the podcast. And that way I could turn around and advertise the podcast. Because, I'm at over just 10,000 followers on Instagram. And then when I started it, I think I was at around maybe 88,000 or something like that, probably. So that helped me it helped it grow. Yeah. And I also have the lucky, fortune, I guess, I'm fortunate enough to have known so many people that have done so many like crazy, awesome things in the military. And and they were also willing to come on the show and talk about it. And that is what really, again, that's all on them. So anything, the rise of the podcast or whatever is, for me personally, is due to those guys, for coming on and telling their stories and stuff like that. And like I said, me just being fortunate enough to know people that have done stuff, and that laid the base. And then people like you, contact me and stuff. And now I'm starting to spread out, and I'm having more people that I don't know reach out to me and send me, like I have a book right here that Chad Cole sent me, The Dirty Little Wars. I'm reading that. And then he wants to be a guest. So I'm going to finish, I'm going to check that book out and then, stuff like that. So that's for someone that wants to get into it and like make it not just a hobby. Cause some people do it like a blog, I'm going to write my blog just because it's a good outlet, and that's cool. And then some people look at it like they want to make it into a business. I would probably say you can dabble in the podcast, but if there's a passion project that you really want to get into, I wouldn't start with that. I would start with something that's something else that you're kind of passionate about, but maybe not as in depth, just so that you can go in and make all the mistakes that you're going to learn and make by just doing it. And then when you go to make your passion project, like that's a lot higher quality, and you're going to get a better, return off the beginning, because people are going to look at it and be like, oh, look, it's produced well. It's like, those stupid mistakes you made the first time around, you're not going to make this time around.
Right. No, that was some advice I got too when I was kind of like floating my idea for what's going to be my side hustle kind of podcast interest was, I started reaching out to my friends and asking them like, hey, what do you think of this idea? And they're like, great. And so then the advice I got was like, hey, don't shoot your first silver bullet inviting the biggest star on that that would say yes for your, because call your friends up who are nobodies and just make sample podcasts, and then play with the editing and everything like that. And then that way you're not shooting your silver bullet on the first one, and you can create a couple and then get it all down, like you were saying, so that it's well produced. You kind of have your thing down, and then you start inviting like the really good names to come in, and you can mess around with it like that too. So I'll probably start out with doing five of these kind of things. We just call it my buddies from the old days, and just start saying like, hey, I really would like to get on, let's go over this story. Remember back when, right? And we'll just do that thing. Yeah. And that might actually be pretty interesting for the person who I'm interviewing to actually have it be like, man, I'm glad I got this thing too. Because when I was talking to my wife this morning, I'm like, hey, listen, you're gonna have to leave me alone for a little while today. I'm gonna do this podcast. She's like, oh, what are you doing? Explain it to her. She's like, oh, how long are you doing? I'm like, I don't know, 2 hours maybe. She's like, well, you're gonna talk for 2 hours? I'm like, I think that's going to be kind of short,
Yeah.
and so,
People that don't
so
realize don't think
yeah,
that 2 hours is a long time, but it's like, dude, we'll hit 3 hours and be like, oh shit, like we have a lot
I
to cover
know.
still, you know?
Yeah. But then at the end, what she said to me, she's like, because she's like, well, what's it about? And I kind of told her, and she's like, oh, that's really cool. She's like, because it's funny. She's like, I hear you and your buddies get together in this segment. She goes like, you've told me some stories, and then I hear you with your buddies, and I hear stories. And she's like, I recognize the stories. I don't know the chronology. She's like, I'm not so sure I know from start to finish what you did for 28 years in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Because we weren't married the whole, like when I was on active duty, so she doesn't understand any of this. And then the reserve thing, like, it's not like she was part of the, the
It's
key
different.
volunteer.
Yeah.
Now she just didn't have anything to do with my military career at all. She went to the Marine Corps ball. That was her only involvement, and then letting me host some buddies on the couch and letting me stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning drinking scotch with them. But
Hey, at least at least
yeah,
that happens, you got that going for you.
exactly.
Yeah, no, it's great. And definitely, I would say when you go to record one, I would try to get as many as you can as in person. In person ones are way better just because the dynamic's better. That would be my suggestion for people that are trying to start a podcast. Like if you can do it in person, do it. These are great, they work, but it's just it's a little less. I don't know. It's not, the dynamic's a little different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Plus, when you're with your buddies, you can sit here and share a drink, whatever, like, and then, I don't know. It's just more to it. It's more personal and more.
I agree.
Yeah, but
you also get to control the video production quality, right? Like I'm looking at your video, and you're obviously very well lit, and I'm looking at mine. I can't tell if I'm well lit or not, but like you can't control my environment, right? Whereas if you're with somebody, you can kind of control the environment. And the neat thing, like I saw this, on some of the other podcasts are also videos, is you can put a camera on the guest, camera on you, and then a camera with the two of you, and just edit back and forth, and you can just kind of chop, and you can outsource all that stuff. If you ever, ended up with some dough coming in from the thing, you can outsource all that work and have a video editor just do it all for you. And now you got two different mediums with the same topic. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're saying. The lighting and stuff for sure, like that kind of stuff, you definitely, it definitely helps. Like I have two lights right here, and then I'll have a third one if I have guests here. Actually, here I have another light I set up, but it does help because what it does, if I don't have these on, I have a main window right here, and the light as the day changes, as we're talking over 3 hours, the light changes and the light in here shifts. And a lot of times I was doing them towards the evening time, and it would be so dark. If you look at my original ones towards the end, sometimes they're a little bit darker, and that's because I'm losing light and I don't have a light like a secondary light like these. And yeah, it's little stuff like that to bring up to production value. The 3 camera thing, one at some point I'll have that set up. I bought this 4K camcorder. I looked in different things that like Joe Rogan was using and stuff like that because his looked pretty good. And I got a camera similar to what he uses. And then because I have a DSLR camera, but I found out that with those you can't, like mirrorless ones, I think you can use like a normal like video camera, I think, but the regular DSLR cameras have like most of them have like a thing where you can only have the shutter open for 15 minutes and then it stops it automatically, so it doesn't burn up the sensor. So I got this camera so that I could do video. And then I found out that you can't plug a camcorder straight into a laptop. You have to get
that Camlink thing.
Yeah, that's what I have, a Camlink 4K. And it took me forever to get it because I realized I needed it right when this whole pandemic thing happened and everybody started working from home and all the home electronic stuff just got sold out. So yeah, and all this stuff is just little things over time. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's like I have an idea, like, hey, I want to get video. Like I think I said originally on like probably episode 20 or 25, like, hey, I'm going to have video by episode 40 or something like that. I had like a goal. So then I was like, okay, to do video, what do I need? And okay, I need lights. I need a camera. I need another tripod for my other, so I got all this stuff. And then that's when I started learning the issues, like, oh, I need this certain, the Camlink 4K, the Elgato 4K. Stuff like that, that's the stuff you learn. Right. Oh, when we were doing Skype interviews, because no one can meet, how am I recording that? It's like, okay, well, I had to get a program that can record that, but then also a program, the way it works is it separates the audio. So I can cut my audio, use my recording here, even though it sounds just as good. If honestly, I probably don't need to do that, but just as a redundancy, I also record my own audio. but I can edit our audio individually. So let's say you have like a bang or something happen in the background, I can cut that out if I want to.
Right, because it's not all audio. It's I know what you mean. Each individual audio track. I'll tell you. I'll show you real quick. Here's what I did. I've been doing a lot of videos for my company. Well, I've been trying to do videos for my company, and so I went out and I bought this camera, which is the Sony A6400. I don't know if you can see it that well in the thing, right?
I see it.
It's got the little, the small little Rode shotgun mic underneath it with the wind filter and everything. And this is fantastic. I think it was, I don't remember how much money it was. It was expensive enough for me to like suck some air through my teeth when I bought it, but not anything I needed to go out and get a loan for.
Yeah, it's under $1,000. I think that camera costs about around like $600.
Yeah, and so
$800.
But like you said, the thing that made it so great was it is set up for video for idiots, right? Like I'm a camera idiot. And then it also doesn't have that 20-minute limiter feature on it.
Yeah.
So I got like true 4K, like, because I've got DSLR cameras that you can only do 20 minutes onto. It's such a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
And then so I was like, great, I got this thing. And then the other thing it just came in the mail the other day was, and you and I were talking about microphones and everything. I've got a bunch of the XLR microphones, right? So, and so I bought the Rodecaster Pro mixing board.
Okay.
It's like it's $500, so it's not a cheap piece of gear.
Yeah.
But it also has Bluetooth, and you can plug your phone into it.
Nice.
And so it's got a micro SD card. So each person, you can have 4 different microphones on it. You can have you can Bluetooth in a phone call that comes in. And then it dumps onto one of those micro SD cards, all the individual tracks also, so you can kind of edit everybody. But it's nice because you can hear everybody. It's got headset jacks. It's got the microphone jacks. You can adjust everybody's levels. You can have people call in. And then you can superimpose it right onto the micro SD cards that are coming out of the cameras. And that's in 2 weeks, that's where we're going to start going with that, is this camera and the mixing board, instead of trying, because the USB things are difficult to start managing after a while too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's, that mixing board's cool for bringing in people on your cell phone.
Yeah. A lot of professionals will tell you that that's the way to go. That's not what I did. And that's probably because I didn't read up enough before I went out and bought my first microphone. And then I was like, well, I'm in it now. I bought 2 microphones because I bought 2 at once. And I was like, well, I've already bought these, and I'm not going to turn around and immediately sell them for half of what they're worth because they're used, technically.
And they're working perfect for you, right? Like,
yeah. No, I mean, for the most part, I have, every once in a while I have some issues, like nothing crazy. I mean, sometimes, like, if you tap these wires on the end, or I don't know, there's occasional issues where it'll cut out, but nothing crazy. Overall, I mean, I drove cross country with these in the back of my Jeep. And, they were on my camping trips with me, and they also, like, I don't know, they weren't in cases either. I don't have like a nice little Pelican case I put them in. They were like tossed in the back of my Jeep with all my other stuff,
bulletproof.
Yeah, so I mean, they work pretty good, but the management of the equipment, I think one thing, if I was to use an XLR microphone, what's good about that is you're taking all the wiring and stuff and putting it on that rather than your own computer, and you're also you're not using your own computer's processing power, which is going to be, for me, could become a big deal. This is a great computer. This is a MacBook Pro that I bought like 2 years ago, or well, I guess 4 years ago now, 2016. This is like 2016 MacBook Pro, so it's got good processing power. But when you have 4 microphones hooked to it, and you're trying to like live stream, because that's the next step for me, is live streaming. So trying to do that while running multiple cameras and like 3 microphones into this thing, like having all the dongles and shit hanging off of it with USB, you could do it, but I don't think it's ideal. So I think that's why most people tell you to get the soundboard and the XLR microphones, and then the computers off to the side to do other stuff, like just worry about uploading, streaming or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's the same. It's the same thing that you hear all, like the dudes that are into their guns say, like, buy once, cry once,
Yeah.
And I think that,
Yeah.
I was starting out from scratch with nothing. So I was like, okay, what's good stuff right now to do? So I buy once, cry once kind of thing.
Yeah, you kind of
But
it's all about how serious you're taking it and what it's used
yeah,
for. If it, like I
mhm,
said, if it's like a blog where I'm just venting, like it's an outlet, and if people listen, cool. If people don't, whatever, then there's no reason to go out and spend
no way. Yeah,
$1,000 plus on the equipment to have like a professional setup because you don't care. But if you're
right.
using it as like a legitimate, like I'd like this to become a thing, I'd like it to become a business, or I want to use it to showcase my capabilities to possibly a future employer, like, hey, look at this, I created it by myself, then I would tell you to maybe spend a little bit more and be very deliberate about what you're doing. Get on like Reddit, read the forums, double check what you're reading on the forums, listen to other podcasts, like figure out your
Yeah,
format. I don't script anything. The only thing I script is the very beginning and the intro. Sometimes you can tell when I'm reading the intro that I'm reading it off the script because I was like, going back and I'm like, man, I keep forgetting to say my website name, or I didn't put out my Instagram this time, or something, something like that. And I was like, I
yeah,
need to put this in a script so I'm getting like the right information out every time. So outside of that, for me, my podcast style, I don't normally like tell people, like people will hit me up like, hey, what kind of questions are we going to talk about? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like I don't write questions down.
right.
Like if I was going to have like a super important person, I would, like a VIP or someone that's like big in the, public sphere or whatever, or someone that I really looked up to, admired, even if they're not in the public sphere. I may go and write down a couple notes of questions that I want to make sure I ask, but I'm not going to have like some interviewers have like a list of questions, and I just don't do that. I think it's better it's just a conversation, just let
Yeah,
it flow
right.
naturally how it goes.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, man, it's podcasting. You could talk about it forever. You can make
I
podcasts
know.
about podcasting. It's
Yeah,
just
exactly. Yeah.
anyone can do
And
it.
they do,
All it is
they do
conversation.
make, yeah, you were saying before, like if it's just like if people are listening to this and they're actually thinking like, hey, I'm going to do this too, like hell, you could just do it with your earbuds and your iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like really, because you probably noticed too, like when you start listening to podcasts, there's a couple things that'll piss you off, right? Shitty audio quality is going to have somebody turn it off really fast, right? So
Yeah.
you got to have something at least be good audio quality. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be like studio quality. It just needs to be good.
Yeah.
And then if you're going to do the video like you're talking about, you just have to have a decent, video experience, or people be like, "Oh God, this is so terrible. This is, hack job. I'm not gonna,
I,
I'm not gonna watch this thing."
I
So
tell
other than
people.
that,
I mean, the thing I tell people is like, if watch your video, and if it's something that you would criticize someone else for, then why would you put it in your own? Like, oh, I hate it when there's like super loud background static, Then
yep,
so okay, mental note, when I make mine, I'm going to take out the super loud background static, if there is some or whatever.
right,
It's like you got to look for what you like in your own like viewing or whatever, content consumption experience, and then turn around and replicate that.
yep,
That's just the best. That's just the best thing. Like, what do I like, and why do I like it that way? And then hold yourself accountable. Because I've done it. Everyone does it. You take shortcuts sometimes. You like, I really don't. It's like it's 11 o'clock. It's 11 p.m. I have other shit to do. Do I really want to go through and edit this? It's and that's a call. Like, do you need to? If you need to, then do it.
right, hmm
For me, the struggle has been trying to be consistent on releasing my podcast Tuesdays, or initially I was releasing them every Thursday. And then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to add in, I have enough time. I can do more podcasts. I have people coming on. So I'm going to add in a second day. And I'm like, should I just release them as like record them, or should I stick with Thursday and then release the other one whenever? I started doing that. And then I was like, well, let me try Mondays and Thursdays. So I've been trying to do Mondays and Thursdays, but it all depends. For me, it's like, I was in school up until recently, full-time student. I'm taking 5 classes. I have the website, and I have graphic design orders for other people that I'm working on. And this is a one-man show. Like I'm,
yeah,
I'm doing all this. So I was not being as consistent as I'd like because I was getting behind on like editing and stuff like that. And, so sometimes I would let some edits just go. Like, I'm not even going to edit this one. I'm just going to put it all together and just throw it on there. And how it goes is how it goes.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's sometimes you got to make that call. It's all about, for me, I'm by myself doing this. So for my own mental health and,
Yeah.
time management, because part of my reason of getting out of the Marine Corps, was to spend more time with my kid, and how I can't say I am if I'm sitting here in front of my computer constantly, and not talking to him at all. Like, so
Yeah.
yeah, the work will always be there.
Right.
It,
Yeah. The other thing too is there's so many YouTube videos out there that you can watch on any
mm-hmm,
aspect of podcasting, right? So
for
like
sure.
if you're trying to figure out the equipment, you can go in there and there's podcasts like reviews of all the equipment. And if you're trying to figure out like lighting, there's all kinds of YouTube videos on how to do lighting, which I
Mm-hmm.
clearly haven't watched. And then there's all kinds of videos on like background and how to light your back and all that stuff. And like you don't need to take the Ron Howard masterclass on, like filmmaking in order to
Yeah.
make this work. You just need to understand some basic concepts and apply them.
Yeah.
So
There's so much free stuff on YouTube. I've learned
yeah,
more from YouTube than any other source for anything, for being a mechanic, for, making podcasts, for editing photos, like everything I've
right,
done. I always go to YouTube and watch a video, someone else doing it, to get a better understanding. Like if I don't understand it, I'm like, for a photo, I'm like, how do they make the background like this, but the photo looks so bright and clear? Then you go on
right,
YouTube and you're like, oh, they took 9 photos and they superimposed them, and this is how you cut this piece out, and this is how you put this piece in there, and you learn these things, and then you do it, and people are like, wow, you're the best photographer ever, and you're just like,
right,
well, yeah,
right.
maybe.
Yeah.
But it's
You
just
know, you
it's
know,
just new YouTube knowledge.
yeah. What's going to be pretty interesting too, and I haven't. Maybe this is happening, and I just don't see it. Tell me if you've seen it. But like, what's going to happen in the Marine Corps when like 3 really funny fucking Lance Corporals get together and decide they're going to make a podcast where they make fun of their unit?
So
Like, man,
yeah, I
that's
don't.
going to happen.
Well, I think the page 11 that everyone signed will keep that from happening. I think the closest thing to that was there were some guys in 29 Palms that used to make these pretty funny videos around the barracks. I think one of them did like the crocodile hunter like voice, and it was like the Marine hunter. There was like a whole group of dudes that used to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then some of those guys got out, and now they all do like Vet TV. I don't know if you've seen Vet TV, but that's like
No.
Vet TV. Donnie O'Malley was a former infantry officer, and he got out and started this like
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, I recognize his
yeah.
name. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Those
Yep.
are hilarious. Some of those videos are
Yeah.
hilarious.
Some of those really funny. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
stuff
I
like
so
that.
I guess I've been out for a while, and I don't know what the page 11 entry is that people sign these days. There must be something that you were referring to that
Yeah,
prohibits you from doing this now, or
I think in 2017 is when I signed it. Maybe it was 2000. Maybe it was right before I got out. But it was like you're basically saying like you're not. You can have your own opinion and stuff like that, but you have to be mindful of what you're putting on social media, because you're going to get in trouble. Oh, it was during the whole Marines United thing. That's what it was.
oh, okay, all right, yeah.
When
That
that
was right
whole
as I was retired. Yeah.
Yeah, when that whole thing went down and they found out that people were uploading like nude photos of chicks and stuff like that, then that's when because I think I'm pretty sure quite a few people got prosecuted for that. Like once that all
Yeah.
went down and they started going through those websites, like NCIS was all over the place on base when it happened. I remember, but yeah. Anyway, so that's the social media thing. You're not supposed to do
Okay.
anything like that. You're not supposed to do anything that makes the uniform look bad or whatever, which kind of blows my mind, because I don't know how many people actually follow it. Because if you look at, I don't know if you're on TikTok, I'm not personally, but I see a ton
Yeah.
of TikTok. There's like TikTok boots and stuff like that on Instagram.
Okay.
And they just take these like dumb videos that boots make and upload them. They're just like, look at this, and they're all in their uniform, all doing stupid stuff. And it's just like, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought TikTok was banned from DOD, but I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
people that use
I
it.
don't even know. My only familiarity with TikTok is that I see the TikTok videos on Instagram.
Yeah, me too.
Man, I'm telling you, like, I just can't do another social media site. I just can't do it, man. So
Well,
much.
one thing I do tell people is if you think you're going to start a business, then go ahead and download TikTok and secure the name. Even if you delete TikTok later, but your profile's still active, but you just delete the app itself. I would do that just so you have the name, so someone else doesn't get it. But yeah, I've gone through and done that. I've bought the website, even though I don't use it, like formeractionguys.com and stuff like that. Oh, you just got blurry for some reason. I wonder what happened.
Did I? I can't tell with
Oh, there you
my.
go.
Okay,
It's all good.
maybe
It
it's
might have just been an
focused. Okay.
autofocus.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool.
But yeah, man, it's a definitely a different time than from when you came in. So I think that's a good transition.
Yeah, sounds good.
So
Do
you
you
came in.
go ahead.
I looked over the bio you sent me before. You said that you came in and you were at Fort Sill while the Gulf War like planning and stuff was going on. So you want to kind of what year did you join?
So I was commissioned in May of 1990,
Okay.
but I did ROTC. So I was that generation where I was sitting at home in high school, and Top Gun came out, and I was like, I want to be a fighter pilot.
Fuck
You
yeah.
know, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. And I looked at my dad, and I was like, hey, I think that's what I want to do with my life. And at that point, I think my parents were really worried that I was just gonna. I grew up in New Jersey, where they don't have self-serve gas, so you can actually have a job pumping gas at the gas
Yeah.
station. And so I was working at a gas station, and I think my parents were like, "Man, I wonder if our son is just destined to to work in the gas station." I wasn't doing well in school and everything, and also my dad was like, "Well, if you want to be a pilot, you got to be an officer and all of that." My dad was like in the '60s drafted into the Army,
Hmm.
and so and I had some family who were in the military too, the Navy on the Navy side and the Marine side, and so my parents reached out and said, like, what does Dave have to do this? And so I figured it out and knew that I had to go to college. I had to graduate from high school and go to college. So I went to the University of South Carolina and did the ROTC program. So like, I don't know if I might get laughed at for saying this, but I feel like I joined the Marine Corps in 1986 because right. I know, and that's kind of laughing, but like that was when like I was getting yelled at by gunnies and
Yeah.
granted I was in college and stuff like that. So like, but that's when I go back and feel like that was the day I started becoming a Marine.
Yeah. I can
And
get
then
that. I can get that
yeah, right.
perspective.
Yeah. And then I got commissioned in May of 1990 and nothing was really going on yet. Like Grenada had kind of flared up and gone away real fast.
Hmm.
And then, but the reason one of the big reasons why I was so interested in the Marine Corps is and I don't know if this is known by a whole lot of people, but it's the only service that will guarantee you flight school in writing if you want to be a pilot, right? Like
Really?
you can get a flight contract in ROTC, you can get a flight contract as, PLC or anything else. Like you go to your recruiter and say, you have to pass a test and things. I'm
Hmm.
sure the rules have changed a little bit since, I was doing this 30 years ago, but I was like, great, I'm going to be a pilot. So I actually got a flight contract. And then it was the beginning of 1990, and one of my really, really good friends who was a couple years ahead of me in the Marines, we had become friends in college. He was killed in a midair collision down in Pensacola, or right outside Pensacola. And that was it, man. There's no way I was going to be a pilot. I knew that was it. So I cashed in my flight contract. And I'll never forget my major saying to me, he's like, you're going into the Marine Corps unrestricted ground. Armstrong, do you know what you're doing? I'm like, well, I got no choice now. I mean, I'm done with OCS. I'm getting commissioned in 3 months. Yeah, okay. So went off to TBS and did all that. And at TBS, there's a little bit of a luck of the draw
Hmm.
with how you get assigned your MOS at TBS. So unlike the enlisted side, I don't think you don't really sign up as an officer unless it's pilot. You don't really get to sign up for anything. You don't really know what you're doing until you're there, and you get grades and you get lineal standing where you stand out with your grades and stuff. And I ended up they break you into thirds, or they did back
Yeah.
then.
No, they
And so
still do. That's still a
like,
thing.
yeah, and so you knew where you were in your thirds, and so I was kind of hovering in the middle of the second third, and I knew that was a bad place to be. So I started to
Why?
fail some
Well,
tests
why was that the bad place to be?
because so I'll just make the numbers up, but let's just say they have X slots to be a tanker, right?
Hmm.
So they'll go through and they'll say, okay, if there's 90 guys in a TBS class, they'll say the first guy, the guy number 1, guy number 31, and guy number 61 get their first choices. And then number 2, number 32, and number 62 get their first choices. So if you're in the middle and you want one of those MOSs that only has a limited number of seats, your probability of getting that goes down.
Yeah.
So I at 21, 22 years old figure that it was easier to go down the ladder than it was to go up the ladder with my lineal standing. So like, well, it was like not I like all of a sudden I was like failing a couple, like couldn't find a couple cans out in the woods on land nav, so my score went down a little bit, and I was able to like punch through the bottom. I went down and ended up like breaking into the top of the third, and they also had a thing where they were like, all right, we like to say that 95% of everybody gets one of their top 3 choices. So then I started playing the game too. It's like, all right, well, there's only 2 tank slots. There's only 2 Amtrak slots. So I'm going to put those as my first and second choice because I'm in the bottom third. So there's no way that's going to filter down to me. And if I really want to be artillery, I'm going to put that as my third choice. They're going to say like, oh man, Armstrong's at the top of the third and he's not even getting one of his top 2 choices. Like, so that's how I ended up getting artillery. I thought it was like the perfect blend of everything that I liked about the Marine Corps. Whether that was naive or not, I don't know. But
what was, if you don't mind me asking, your friend that got killed? What was that? I mean, that's crazy. That's like, what an unfortunate incident. Was it a military, like aircraft to aircraft collision?
Yeah.
Is that what it was? Yeah.
His name was Ken Smith. And just, like a terrific friend of mine, was like a mentor to me when I was younger in ROTC. He was one of those kind of guys that like helps you in your formative years of growing up in the Marine Corps, like figuring out like, hey, there's the rule book, but then there's also these sets of right and wrong also that aren't necessarily written down, but you just need to know them. Like our ethos, like things about the Marines.
Yeah, it's a good mentor.
Right. Like I'm going to make up a really extreme example, but I don't think there's anywhere in the regulation where it says like, hey, it's against the regulations to fall back on a run. Right.
Yeah.
But like, we all know you don't fall back on a run or you're just shippered. So just stuff like that, like learning that kind of stuff. And he was really helpful in getting me, integrated into a Marine culture as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And back then in the 80s, look, I'm just going to say it, like that included a lot of drinking too, right? Because like The Great Santini was still kind of a new movie.
I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, really? You got to watch this great movie about way back in the day, like late 70s, early 80s. Robert Duvall is a F-4 fighter pilot in the Marines, and it's fantastic. Like there's like the quotable quotes in there, and just hard drinking, hard charging Marine squadron commander. Definitely watch that. But and so he graduated, went to TBS, went to flight school, and so he was actually in a T-34 trainer with an instructor pilot in the back seat. And as I understand the story, they were doing touch and goes on what I think is termed like an uncontrolled airfield. I think my aviator friends may lop my head off for using that term if it's incorrect, but like basically there's no control tower there, and it was like way off, like in the backwoods of somewhere, right? It wasn't like the big base. And so I think in order to control who's going where, you're on the radio a lot, kind of like, as JTACs, you got to know where your stack is and you got to know where everybody is. And so they did that just through their own situation. We were on the radio and calling in, hey, I'm coming in for landing. And there was some sort of miscommunication and 2 planes started to come in and land at the same time and they collided.
Damn.
And Ken's plane went upside down and buried into the ground, and both he and the instructor pilot were killed. And I may not remember this exactly right, but I think somebody survived from the other plane, which is how we know the story of what happened. But that was just devastating to me. I mean, like as a 21-year-old, I'm just going to say it, like kid still at the time, not growing up in a Marine Corps that was involved in combat. And really the only stories about combat that you heard back then were like the old Vietnam vets that were talking about it, to all of a sudden just like lose your best friend so fast like that, one of your best friends. It really crushed me. Like that was a really formative moment in my life. It was also when I kind of figured out like, wow, the truism of in the blink of an eye somebody can be gone. And so it was a military accident. And they still down at my R2C unit, they still honor his name every year. They give one of the top graduating Marine officers his own Mamluk sword with Ken's name on it and everything. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's an awesome thing. Like you see guys that left a lasting impact on people and stuff like that, where in the military, they just do, I think we do a really, especially in the Marine Corps, I speak from Marine Corps experience only, but I think we do a really good job of memorializing those people and trying to keep that memory alive. A really good example of that is First Sergeant Sill on Camp Pendleton. I don't know if you've ever seen it or been up there.
I have not, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's like it's just a memorial, with all kinds of names, dog tags, and, and like when the fires come through Pendleton, Marines will climb that hill and grab the crosses and carry them down, and then when the fires are gone, they put them on their back and carry the crosses back up the hill and re-erect them and stuff. And it's like something like that. I don't know how you can. I don't know. That's like the most honorable thing I think I've seen people do to memorialize, people, loved ones or whatever that have passed. It's a really, I don't know. It's a unique experience seeing something like that and having a unit, like you said, still handing out a sword in his memory, which is, I think that's a really awesome thing. It's
it's one of the cool things that it's, like we all like to joke, right? And Marines, we're the best at it, right? Like we all love the hearing I was going to be a Marine, but right.
Yeah.
But man, it's so true. And when people are like, when my civilian friends ask me about the Marine Corps and everything, I think they're kind of looking at what I did or didn't do, or what they think I did or didn't do. It's like those memes that says like, "Hey, what my friends think I do and what I really do," kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's all formed through like movies and things that they see, and then what I love about the Marine Corps is part of what you just touched on was like we have our formal shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got Arlington, we've got the folding of the flag, we've got the 21 guns. That's all like the formal stuff. But then you just get this thing about us being Marines where it's like, and we're going to create this hill, and there's like there was no Marine Corps order that started that hill. I'm guessing, right?
No.
This is probably just started off with a bunch of dudes who were like, "Fuck it, let's go up there and put a cross up there and hang, somebody's dog tags up there." And the next thing you know, like I said, I've never been there, but I've seen pictures of it. Like that's a thing. That has nothing to do with a unit. That has nothing to do with an individual person. That's just dudes honoring other dudes. And that's one of the things that makes the Marine Corps so special. And we're all entitled to bitch about everything we want to about the Marine Corps. But when you look at it as a big organization, that is one of the things that makes us truly awesome.
Yeah, it's I mean, we all have shared experiences. We can all relate to each other. We all speak the same language. That's just how it is.
Right.
And the military, I think, has done a pretty good job of defending the use of that hill and the Marines that are putting those crosses up, because there's some kind of anti-religion group that was trying to have them taken down, saying that the military is endorsing, religion by having them up there. And it was funny. I was having a conversation with some chick on Twitter yesterday who was talking about how there's so many religious zealots in the military, and that they're trying to start a religious war and all this shit. And I'm like, what are you even talking about? She's like, I know, because my dad was in the Air Force and he retired and this. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but there are religious people in the military, but I would say that they're probably outnumbered a lot by non-religious people, or people that just choose not to broadcast it,
Right.
And trying to use an example of like having a prayer before a ceremony or something, like a non-denominational prayer, before a ceremony or something like that, is just a ridiculous, assertion. And then trying to say that these memorials that these guys have built themselves and carry, guys and girls, don't get me wrong. I say guys, I mean guys and girls when I say that.
You mean it like New Jersey guys, you don't mean gender guys.
Yeah. And like I say dudes a lot, that's guys, that's a group of people, not just dudes, but you know what I'm saying?
Right. Disclaimer done, right?
Yeah.
Got it.
But them taking that on their own time, building it and putting them up there and erecting them and maintaining them. And there's cleanup parties that go up there sometimes. There's guys that'll, and stuff like that. And the military does none of that. They don't plan anything around it. There's no official recognition of it, but they understand that it's there, and they let the Marines do it because that's their way of honoring their friends. And I just think it's ridiculous that people want to take that down and stuff like that. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's a good way to honor people. But anyway, we went down a long tangent there.
We did. So after I graduated, so I came in, however you want to classify it. I was commissioned in May of 1990, and then weird because the funny thing about when you're an RT, you become an officer, like you graduate from college and you've got a job. Mm-hmm. Like there's no job hunting, there's no interviewing. You're just like, you spent 4 years interviewing, I guess, but off you go, right? Yeah. And so 2 weeks later, I was at the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, as everybody knows, and doing my thing. And when I tell people, like when I came in the Marine Corps, like I like to make the joke, like I came in the Marine Corps before we even had name tapes on our uniforms. Like they still wore rank on the front of your cover, that like the little frogs with bats with foreheads in. Like they had just phased that out when I came in, right? But
I never knew that we ever wore rank on our cover.
Yeah, like in the 80s. So my ROTC, cadre, the staff there were gunnies and MECEPs there, the enlisted guys that were going to become officers, and they were all Marines in our major, and they all wore the rank on the front of their cover. Like you would take like your collar rank and you just put it on there with the frogs. And
was there no EGA on their cover?
You put it right through the EGA. It was kind of weird.
What?
yeah, you're testing my memory 30 years ago. I don't recall the 8-point covers not having the EG. I think they did. I think they just put the thing right through it. And then
Huh.
whoever like I can't remember who the commandant was before General Gray, but I think General Gray was the one that got rid of that.
Yeah.
And I remember a time too where I think they even wore white T-shirts under their camis. That was way back, like,
Yeah, I
you know,
remember seeing pictures of people like that.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah. But so yeah, so I went to TBS, and man, TBS was kind of a crazy time for me as I reflect back on it too, because again, just very very quickly in my career, I'll tell the story very quickly, but I'll never forget it was the Monday night, so like Tuesday morning essentially, right after Memorial Day weekend, and I'm sleeping in my rack, and the way they did it at TBS at the time, and they may still do it this way too. Um, well, we were an all guys platoon. They hadn't integrated the women into the TBS classes yet,
Hmm.
and so it was all guys and truly dudes, right? In one platoon, everybody was alphabetical. So Armstrong, I was like the first room, right next to like where the company commander was, and then everybody. So A through D was my platoon, and I remember waking up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I hear this like guy vomiting in the room next door to me. And I'm like, oh, I guess he had a hell of a Memorial Day weekend. But that woke me up. And then all of a sudden, I hear this screaming down the hall. Somebody fucking help me. I'm like, whoa, right? I mean, here's Second Lieutenant Dave Armstrong with, like all of 2 weeks at TBS. I had barely run the O course and like gone to medical, right? That was it. It's about all we had done at that point. And I was sleeping in like my silkies or whatever, and I run out in the hallway, and it's 2:30 in the morning, and I see this knife in the middle of the passageway with blood all over it.
Oh shit.
And I'm like, holy shit, what the fuck? And the first thing I think is like, I wonder if somebody tried to break in and steal something, and right. So I run down to this room, and I mean, this is back in the day when I was fine running around without a t-shirt on, right? I was still in pretty good shape back then. And I'm running down, so I'm literally just in my silkies, and I walk into this TBS barracks room, and there is the lieutenant officer of the day, right, which is like the fake officer of the day, and he's got his green duty belt and his cover on, and he is wrestling with a Marine who happened to be his roommate, and the Marine, the not the one that was on duty, the other guy was trying to kill himself, and he was taking a knife and like doing this on his neck with it.
Oh
And so
shit.
I know
Jesus.
it was the most unbelievably brutal thing I had ever
God.
witnessed in my entire life, right? And possibly still one of the most brutal things. And I just remember seeing it like, oh my God. And Keith, the guy who was in uniform, the officer of the day, Keith Canavero was his name. Keith is like trying to grab his hand and keep and the other guy, his name is Carly. He kept taking the knife and like doing it with like he just kept switching the hands back and forth, but he was cutting like way back in the muscle of his neck, and he wasn't getting like the jugular, right?
Oh man.
So I run in there. So I am the second guy. I'm the third person in the room, the second guy on the scene, and so I grab this guy's other hand, get the knife out of his hand. Some other people start running in. We get him down on the rack, and he was one of those guys in the Marines that could like run the O course faster than anybody. He was like 155 pounds and like a wrestler, kind of like, and he was thrashing. We get him down on his rack. They had like the standard bunk beds like you had at boot camp, and we get him down, and he's slashing, but there's just blood going everywhere, man. I mean, it was crazy. And we finally get him down, and he kept like shaking his neck and like pushing it way down, so we couldn't get anything on his neck. And it was a standard squad based setup. So you had your proper, inspection ready towel set up, but you never really used them. And we're like trying to pull towels off down and get it all down. And I remember like I had my knees were on his shoulders, and I reached down and I put my thumbs into his nose, and I just wrenched his head straight back to like open. And like everybody started putting and then he started like calming down. And then what we realized as we started looking around the room was he had drank like a whole bottle of whiskey
Yeah.
and was drunk, and long story short, like his girlfriend had broken up with him over the phone, and like so went down to like he went down to the liquor store, he went down to the Hawk, which is like our bar that we were allowed to go to, and or something, and so now we're looking around like, oh my God. And as we're looking around more, there's like well, also we start, there's like prescription pill bottles open and like, oh man, holy shit. And so our real company commander and the real officer of the day show up, and they walk in this room, and there's like 6 lieutenants just covered with blood, and they're like, what in the fuck is going on in here? Right? The ambulance.
That dude is like, shit, I can't believe I'm on duty today.
I know, exactly. I'm like, and I'm 2 weeks into being in the Marines. I'm like, what the fuck? Yeah. So this was like pre-cell phone days, right? Because this is like 1990. So
yeah.
Somebody says like, hey, the real company commander, our Major Armstrong, like he's on the phone. He needs to talk to somebody. So I'm on the phone with him. I've got like blood all over me. And I'm like, hey, sir, this is Lieutenant Armstrong. And he's like, listen, Armstrong, he's like, here's what I need you to do. He's like, I need you to go to the hospital with him. I need you to like be in the ambulance. Like somebody needs to go to the hospital with him. I'm getting in my car. I'll be at the hospital as soon as I can, blah, blah, blah. So I'm riding in the ambulance with this guy and like listening to him blabber on. And I'm still in my silkies, and I had like thrown a t-shirt on. I don't even remember having shoes on, to be honest with you. I'm in the hospital and I'm looking at myself, and like, I'm still a mess. And a chaplain came in and started talking to the Marine, and like then the Marine just like vomited all over the chaplain, like straight down the chaplain's uniform.
Jeez.
It's like now it's the alcohol and the like and maybe they gave him something to try to get him to vomit and all that stuff, and you could see the pills all in his vomit. I'm like, oh my God. So I'm sorry, I'm really belaboring this story. It's actually pretty interesting.
No, it's an interesting story. That's just like it's unfortunate, it's sad.
Right, it is. And then, but this is kind of like one of the interesting observations is like how we never in the Marine Corps ever thought about how an episode could potentially impact somebody. So like, I don't really have any lingering issues from that, but the end of the story is, so then I come back to the basic school. It's like 8:30 in the morning. The first thing I do is I walk into the company commander's office, who's sitting there waiting for me, because he's like, when you get back here, come straight to my office. So again, just like a mess. I'm a mess. And,
are you just walking around in silkies and a t-shirt and still covered in blood?
Pretty much. I mean, like I washed my hands, but it was like still in my fingernails.
Yeah.
And, like, the cracks in the skin, like I wasn't fully clean. And I walked into the company commander's office. So yeah, I was still in silky, still in a shirt. So like that, my clothing still had blood all over it. And he's like, hey, what you did, like you potentially saved this Marine's life and everything else. I'm like, all right, sir. He's like, all right, so go get yourself cleaned up. The Marines are over in whatever hall doing their XYZ class. I'm like, I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, hey, how about like give me the rest of the day off? I mean, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of weird. And yeah, so that was like that was one of my first times, in the Marines.
There's different perspectives that people have, right? Some people think, hey, let's give them some time to kind of cope with this. Let's sit back. Let's give them someone, resources to talk to. And this is just in general, like traumatic situations. And some people are like, hey, man, either I think it's better if we just keep working and you don't think about it, because dwelling on something isn't going to make it better.
Right.
And I can see.
And it didn't do anything. I mean, like I was okay. I wasn't like really upset. I'm trying to reflect on what it was like, but yeah, like nobody was really thinking about that. And frankly, I didn't ask for it either.
I just remember a similar situation, and I wasn't there on the ground, like in the area or right in that direct area, but when the howitzer exploded at Fort Bragg, right?
Yeah.
We had multiple, I think it was like 6 or 7 people got medevaced out that were like severely injured. I think one person, like, one of the corpsmen almost died. His femoral artery got severed, and they got a tourniquet on him and saved him. No one died, luckily. That
was a Rolling Thunder, right?
Rolling Thunder in 2000. It was in March of 2011.
Yeah.
Because we attached a 3.6 right after that deployed, but that howitzer exploded, and they were trying to. So then they had to identify the issue, right? Like, okay, let's put a freeze on anyone using this lot of ammo and this lot of fuse until we can figure out what the hell's going on. But we had other ammo and other fuses. So I think we started shooting again within 36 hours, including that battery. And there were people in that battery that were not very happy with the battalion commander, that were like, dude, we just watched a gun explode, our own buddies like get medevaced out, and now you want me to load up a gun and fire it, And I completely understand. Like I said, I completely understand. I don't completely understand both sides, but I get the thought process behind both sides, because I've definitely had negative stuff happen, And when you have too much time to dwell on it, it's just unhealthy. That's all. When you're just sitting there going over it over and over again, it's just not a healthy thing, you know?
Right.
So I understand both sides. So but finding that right time to get somebody back to work, and it's honestly, it's a tough situation. Now, whoever you worked with was like, all right, hey, okay, go PT, you know, like go right into it.
Yeah.
That's obviously a fucked up situation, and that person individually is wrong. But I think it's for anybody that's in charge, it's got to be a hard decision on when's the right time to get back into it, like get off the saddle and start working again or whatever.
Right.
Knowing that everybody deals with shit like that differently. Like, you may be fine from it, but I'm sure other people that were there in that event think about it. You know, it's like something that's, you know, a big part of their life, like a traumatic event like that.
We still talk about it. Like when I get together with my lieutenant buddies, I mean, that story is always recycled. And, you know, I don't know if the major, I don't think he did anything. I just think it was a reflection of us not even thinking about it back then. It wasn't like right or wrong. It was just like, there just wasn't combat going on back then. Nobody, and I don't think the Vietnam generation ever really talked about PTSD and things that they could be doing or like the signs of things. I just don't think it was part of anybody's mindset or thought pattern at the time. It certainly wasn't mine. And that company commander was one of the most phenomenal Marine officers I ever met. He was an infantry officer. I just held him in the highest regard. I just don't think that anybody really thought about it.
Yeah.
I just, you know, it was just one of those things.
The mental health conversation has definitely been forwarded a lot in the last decade or so because of, you know, people seeing the results of guys coming back from the war. Partially, though, I think that is over amplified because dudes come back and claim PTSD for everything anytime they get in trouble. You know, that's an automatic easy out or easy defense. I think that and people trying to get, you know, 100% on their VA, you know, so they can get their VA benefits. I think more people claim to have PTSD than actually have it. But I think the people that do have it, that are actually affected, that, you know, struggle daily because of stuff that they've done in combat. And a good example is Michael Hanthorne. You know, he talks about it at his time in Fallujah being mortuary affairs. You know, imagine cleaning up dead bodies for a month.
Oh, man.
You know, him and his team, he said they cleaned up probably 600 plus dead insurgents, you know. And so someone like that, yeah, dude, like, yeah, you probably are fucked up and you probably do need help. And someone should be like, hey, what's going on, you know? And he even said that the Marine Corps, you know, they got back and there was no kind of specialized healthcare, mental health for those guys. And I think he said out of his platoon, only him and one other guy stayed in the military. Everyone else got in trouble, got out, you know, guys got kicked out for mental health issues, you know, obviously. Yeah. And then guys got in trouble that were probably partially to deal with, like, I think he talked about on the podcast, there was one guy that came back and started like killing animals and shit. You know, and it's one of those things. It's like, okay, dude, you know, like, is that a prior you know, is he kind of off because of something before the military? But cleaning up dead bodies for a month and some of the shit that you have to go through, the mental games that you have to go through to make it through that mentally sound, you know, to have your mental health intact.
Right.
I mean, I couldn't imagine. And I know Michael struggles with PTSD. I don't know. I won't necessarily struggles with it, but he deals with it. And and I think I think I don't know. It's getting better. People are understanding. Yeah. People are more aware of it. My problem is that so many people are over claiming it, or people are using it for every defense for something they did wrong and stuff like that. Or that's all that we talk about about veterans is PTSD. Is that it's become a stigmatized thing where you know, I go to college and I am a combat veteran and I did go through combat and stuff like that. However, I know that 98% of the Marine Corps never got shot at. You know, even if, you know, like, even if you go to Afghanistan, a good majority of, I don't say a good majority, but a good amount of the people never left like Leatherneck. And that's not on them. There's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. But to say that that experience is the same as someone that got shot at constantly that's not the same. But civilians don't see that. So if they see you and you're like, I was in the military, you could have been in the Navy, and they're just going to assume this dude's probably killed people. He's been in combat. And like you said before,
or he's got a hair trigger or a touchy temper, or, you know, you never know when's he going to snap.
It's never going to snap. Yeah. Yeah. And that's caused a lot by the media. That's caused a lot by like Hollywood, the perception of how the military is, the way we're perceived and the way we're portrayed. Like we're not regular people. Like people think that people in the military are just like robots that don't think. And it's like, that's not it at all. Like there is time and place for, instant willing obedience, tall orders, respect for authority, blah, 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 that stuff. But in general, they're all regular people with regular things going on. And, I don't know. I'm rambling now, but it's just like I just think the military is portrayed negatively I don't like how people think we just march around, everywhere we're marching and standing at attention all the time. And it's like, no, dude, it's mostly chill. And I like this podcast, I hope brings that out, and other podcasts, there's other podcasts, a ton of military podcasts out there that I'm hoping that is opening people's eyes to like the military is just another job sector. And there are dangerous jobs within that job sector. However, there's a lot of like not dangerous jobs, and there's a lot of just regular people that come in and work in an office every day. They just put on a uniform and they got to come in and run in the morning before they go work at the office, Yeah. So,
but it was also interesting because what you did was you just made me think back and because you were asking me before about Fort Sill, and now that I'm thinking back to that too, after TBS I went to Fort Sill. So I went to Fort Sill in November of 1990, November, December. And then, so I was at TBS when the Gulf War kicked off. We were all sitting out on some machine gun range, and that same major, he comes out. So it was August, and he comes out and he's like, how many of you lieutenants know where the country of Kuwait is, right? And like all the Ivy League school guys went like this, and like all the state school kids like me like put their head down on the ground, like just hope he didn't get called on. And he said like, hey, last night Kuwait was invaded, and the country's going to war, and the 82nd Airborne is going off. He's like, and now this is all potentially for real. And like, I mean, there was that moment I was like, whoa. Mm-hmm. And I also remember, not that this is really important to the topic of PTSD, but it's worth mentioning that like there was this instant hatred by the captains towards the lieutenants, because those captains realized that we were probably going to get a chance to go to war, and they were going to miss it because they were TBS cuts, right? Yeah. Like, and so like the hate factor went through the roof. It was so unbelievable. Really shaped a lot of my own professional, like my leadership personality, like in a way, like I'm never going to be like that.
Yeah.
But I went off to Fort Sill, and then they kind of thought like, mustard gas was going to kill the entire first wave. So like combat replacement casualties, and they started pumping us through Fort Sill as fast as they could. And then, the whole thing was over in 100 hours, and we're sitting there with this advanced syllabus, going to graduate early. And all of a sudden somebody said, holy shit, what are we going to do with these guys? Right? Like there's no units for them to go to. We have nothing for them to do. What are we going to do with this group of 30 Marine officers, basically us and another class? And so I remember the CO of TBS, Fort Sill comes in at times like, all right, we don't really know where to send you. So here are some options. You can go to jump school. You can go to scuba school, because none of these schools had people in them, right?
Yeah.
They had no, you can go to ranger school, scuba school, airborne school.
Everybody else is deploying or deployed.
Right. And or you can go to you can go check in out at your unit, but you're going to get put in charge of like the chlorine count at the pool, or like, or you can stay here at Fort Sill and help gunnery instructors teach classes. Of course, nobody wanted to do that. So most of my class, we all went to airborne school. So you got like 12 second lieutenants going to airborne school. It was crazy. That burned off about 4 weeks. And then we eventually ended up at our units. And so I checked into Sierra Battery 5. I checked into 511 when it was still in 29 Palms. So back in May-ish of 1991.
Okay.
And they had literally been back for like a week. And I got assigned to Sierra Battery, and the interesting history of 511 was that they were a self-propelled battalion for a long time. And then about a year before the Gulf War kicked off, they transitioned away from the self-propelleds, the old 09s, and the actual 110s, like the 8-inch howitzers, and transitioned over to the 9 or 8s. But then when they got sent to Kuwait for the war, all the MPF shipping hadn't caught up with the changes and still had all the self-propels on it.
Oh.
So 511 was like, well, hey,
figure
back
it
on
out.
the self-propels, right? So they were literally like pulling mechanics out of the brig and all that kind of stuff, because he just didn't have anybody anymore.
That's funny.
So they rolled as the self-propelled battalion, and Sierra Battery was actually one of an unfortunate incident where they were doing a raid up on the border, and when they turned around and they were coming back south from the raid, an A6 pilot accidentally identified them as tanks and rolled in hot on them with laser-guided bombs, dropped a bomb on one of the O9s in Sierra Battery, and killed the driver, maimed the loader, and tore the arm off the howitzer section chief. His name was Almanzo, I think, Armando. I'm struggling there, but so Sierra Battery, like you were talking about, like, I mean, they saw a really traumatic event. They saw a whole howitzer section of their buddies get killed, like, boom, like where they didn't even know what it was. It was a bomb that hit them.
Yeah,
and a really traumatic event. And I remember like checking into the battalion and then the battery, and it was only like they had just only been back for 2 or 3 weeks, and thinking like, wow, there's just not a whole lot of talk about the fact that this entire gun section just basically got wiped out by one of our own. And thinking to myself, like, where is the talk about that, right? And then myself feeling really uncomfortable, not really knowing how to talk. Should I talk about it as a new guy? I wasn't there. And you could tell there was like a lot of pain. Like I would just sit around the battery position out in the field and listen to these guys talk about it and be like, man, I don't even know what to say right now. And I'm their lieutenant.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's the best thing you can say.
Yeah.
Just be like, dude, I can't, you can't relate. Because if you can't relate and then you try to pretend like you can, I think that's way worse than just being like, hey, man, that's crazy. Like, it's so unfortunate, what do you think about it? Kind of deal, like be there for someone to listen to, but I don't know. You're right. It's like a touchy subject. It's like a thin line right there of like crossing the line and speaking out of turn. Because when someone's talking about their friends dying or something like that, it's obviously a super serious thing, and that's not something you want to, go over the line. Especially if you weren't there at all, you don't even know the person.
Right.
That has to have been a. The Gulf War, I think that's one of the most famous things that came out of the Gulf War was the amount of fratricide we had. I think they said there's more people killed by our own bombs than we had killed by the Iraqis during that war. It's such an unfortunate thing. And then even with laser-guided bombs and stuff like that, it just shows that, there's always going to be mistakes. And that's one thing that we always try to push back in, when I was in, was like, understanding what you're doing and understanding what the target is that you're attacking and fully, aware of what's about to happen, because it's not, it's real life, it's like, it's not a game anymore when you're over there.
It shaped my time as in the future when I became a JTAC and was at ANGLICO, that certainly shaped, because I remember like saying to people like, hey, listen, I know not firsthand, but I know a situation firsthand where a pilot's inability to identify friend or foe from however many thousand feet, just based on something that has a tube and is going south. What a massive fire support coordination failure that was. What a massive pilot error that was. Mm-hmm. And those are all things that like are real life consequences of people not doing their jobs. Not just the guy on the ground with the radio clearing an aircraft hot, but all of it. Like fire support coordination, and here was another lesson that was learned too that really carried over. And I'll tell you about this story when I ended up going to Mogadishu, which was my battery commander at that time, the battery commander for Sierra Battery over there. And then when I joined, he was still the battery commander, was a guy named Rob Davis. Mm-hmm. And Rob Davis went on to have a fantastic career in the artillery community. I think he was one of those guys that you looked at him and you're like, he was out in the field and you're like, he looked like a private. He was so dirty all the time because he was just always running around, and like he was an artilleryman. I mean, he was an amazing teacher and mentor as a captain. And I remember him very early on when I joined the battery, making me ride with him in the CO's vehicle for like the very first field operation, and teaching me how to lay the battery and teaching me how to set up the aiming circle. He's like, hey, I know you learned how to do this at Fort Sill, but like, let me show you how this is really done. And taking an active interest in teaching a second lieutenant, it was just amazing. I have so much gratitude for him, but, and he refused to go out into the field, even in a training exercise, without a 113 strapped to the back of his driver's. These are the old soft canvas 4-door Hummers, but he strapped a 113 to the back, and it was always on guard. And he was like, I will never, ever, ever allow myself to go to the field without the ability to talk to an aircraft and tell them that they are bombing my own position.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, like, whoa, And then it was sort of like I realized the scarcity of a 113, right? Like
Yeah.
not everybody has them. I didn't even know what a prick 113 was when I was.
I don't even know what that is. We weren't using those
I'm
anymore.
sorry. Right? Yeah, it's basically it was the UHF radio with the big donkey dick on it, and that's what
Mm.
the fax carried.
I think the oldest radio I used was a 119. You know, when I first
Okay,
came in.
that was the newest radio.
Yeah.
We were still using the old Prick 77s and making field expedient antennas, but
The 119s are pretty straightforward though. You know, they're pretty easy to use. It's you can't. That's almost dummy proof. You know.
yeah, and they're small too.
The only thing complicated about that, well, small. You know,
Yeah.
the 117 is like the same size unless you get the 117 Golf, and that is like half the size. It's almost like the size of the battery box for the 119. Yeah.
Okay, I'm confusing that one. Yeah. So,
yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on you. You talked about you got to the unit, you know, and everyone had just got back from the war. Like that's something that kind of is happening now, where guys are like joining the military thinking they're going to go to Afghanistan or something like that. And they're showing up to units. Well, not as much anymore. I guess we're kind of past that. But a couple of years ago, guys were showing up and thinking that they were going to get to deploy and stuff, but never, you know, it's kind of like you missed out. Like you missed out on the war, dude. Sorry. And some dudes will give dudes shit about it constantly. You know, some dudes ride people's ass and stuff like that. So what was it like for you to be the dude that showed up and just missed out on the war, you know, and then as a leader and a lieutenant trying to tell people what to do and like, you know, this is what it's going to be like, you know, when they've actually done it and you haven't, kind of deal.
Right. Yeah. So great question, and I remember it really vividly too. And I'll tell you, like, you know, this may be unique to the artillery community, but you know, like, there's leadership in the artillery community, and then there's technical proficiency, right? And when you're out in the field, like your technical proficiency, and I'll just talk about like being the fire direction officer, the fire direction officer back in the battery, like computing the data. Like Marines are looking at you at that situation and saying like, are you an idiot, right? So very early on when I joined that battery, we went to the field and we started doing our thing. And I was new and I didn't really understand, but I was the headquarters platoon commander. So in that role, in that battery at the time, was you were in charge of all the cats, everything that wasn't a gun, right?
Yeah.
So it's the comm section, the motor T section, all that. You're in charge of that. And then when you went to the field, you were the assistant fire direction officer, which basically means you were the guy that was in charge of computing the safety. And then, you know, if there were watches or whatever, you were the assistant fire director, you were the backup guy. So I didn't go into a role as an FO when I came to battery. I was there. And so my headquarters platoon sergeant was the operations chief, the FDC ops chief. And he was a great guy. And so this is where, like, as an officer, this is where you get into like your ability to efficiently and effectively lead Marines when you have really no experience doing it is so heavily influenced by your relationship with your platoon sergeant that you have. And that's a luck of the draw, right?
Yeah.
And thankfully, I drew a good straw on that. I ended up with a guy named Staff Sergeant Ed Garrison. He was Staff Sergeant at the time. He was the ops chief in the FDC in the Gulf War. A ton of experience, really great guy, good personality, and he and I got along really, really well. So he helped me, you know, pick up the technical proficiencies, and he's the one that said like, hey, the way you're going to overcome this you weren't there thing is for the Marines to see that you know your shit about artillery.
Yeah.
So stop focusing on trying to make up for the fact that you weren't in combat and offset that with the Marines looking at you and saying like, hey, Lieutenant Armstrong's actually, he knows his shit, you know?
Yeah.
He's like, sir, focus on that. And he was really helpful with that. So he taught me how to be more of a gunnery, proficient in the gunnery, proficient in being an artilleryman, and so did Rob Davis.
Yeah.
And the other lieutenants too. So the other lieutenants didn't give me shit, but I was also smart enough to keep my mouth shut when they were telling stories, right?
Yeah.
And if I had a question about something they were talking about, like I asked them later about it. I didn't stop the story and be like, what does that mean? And like show my ass. And so yeah, I just shut up and did a lot of listening. And there was some testing too, right? Like I was telling you a story about the guy that had his arm blown off. He came into the battery office one day and he's got a hook, right, from where his arm was. and somebody said, "Hey, this is our new, Lieutenant Armstrong," and he stuck his hook out as if he was going to shake my hand, and he was like, "Welcome to Sierra Battery, sir." And like, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this hook and I'm like, do I grab that? Like, I'm shaking his hand. Like, what do I do? So I fucking grabbed the hook and shook it like it was his hand and didn't even miss a beat, right? And he looked over at Ed Garrison. He goes, "He's the first officer to do that." Like, I was like, okay, I guess that was one of those like tests you hear about when you're a new officer. But so that lasted for like 6 months, but then all of a sudden the turnover starts to happen, as it always does in any unit, right? And then it started to equalize, and some new officers came in behind me, and it just like it bled off.
Yeah.
It just bled off. And
like it is now.
I think so too, right? And so I always appreciated the fact that there were guys there with a lot of experience. And they were also, if I remember, they were also really anxious to get out as well. Like, the guys that had deployed were like, "I'm out, I'm getting out, I'm getting out." And I remember really vividly like seeing these really good Marines get out because, they had deployed to combat. They were just kind of over it. They were just over the Marine Corps. And I think the other adjustment I remember too was watching these guys come back from an environment that I wasn't familiar with, but I know it wasn't very garrison-like in combat. And they come back, and now all of a sudden it's field days and sweeping the parking lots and, doing all the bullshit they had to do. Right. And I just remember that chafing the guys,
I think that's a huge deal that guys, that's a major issue, that guys come back and are like, what am I doing this for? Like, why, I was over there doing my thing. There's no worries. Like, when you're deployed, there's like, you're not thinking about, you're thinking about shit back home, but not like, you don't have the day-to-day like worries and shit. Life's a lot simpler. Get up, go work out, maybe go on patrol or whatever, come back and you're done. That's the day. And it's just a simple place where you're doing your job, and you're actually getting to do your job, and then it's pretty fulfilling. And I don't know. It's you come back from that, and then you get treated. For me, when I got, and I know the listeners have all heard it, but when I went to the MEU after coming back from multiple deployments, and then going there and being treated as a second-class citizen because I wasn't a gunnery sergeant, so I'm down with the E6 and below, living in the troop berthing, and being told like, why are you walking in this passageway? Like, this isn't. And I'm like, dude, I fucking work here. Shit like that. Like, seeing my Marines get put on working parties to go do officer laundry, or to serve chow. And to serve chow in the officer mess, and they get to see like how the officers are eating and the chiefs are eating, and then they come and see what we're eating and see how, it's just a different world on ship. And, I remember having a gunny who had done one deployment. This is my fifth, I think. And I remember having a gunny who had done one deployment going, "Yeah, you'll earn your spot in the chief's mess at some point." And I'm just like, you know what? Go fuck yourself. Like, if that's like your attitude as a Marine, like coming on here, and I don't know, just living in a world where, like in Afghanistan, I slept next to my captain. I slept, we all slept in the same shithole together. We all walked to chow and ate together, and we all went out and did patrols and stuff together. And then going to that world where officers enlisted are just completely separate, where officers are going to stay up here and enlisted are going to stay down here. Occasionally an officer will come down and be like, "Man, how's everything going, gents? All right, cool." Yeah. And then they go back up top. And don't get me wrong, I know they have their own pressures and it's their own world. But for me, thinking like I'm benefiting the Marine Corps by doing my job and being very good at it and teaching and shit like that, to get pulled from what I was doing to go sit on ship and get told that, I don't rate this because I'm just an E6 or whatever. And I'm like, dude, go fuck yourself. And this may surprise people, but we did the crossing the equator. And I told them to go fuck themselves.
They're crossing the line ceremony?
They're like, "Do you want to do it?" And I'm like, "No way, man." I was like, I used to like have respect for the Navy, and I'm all about like the history of it and the time-honored traditions, and that's a time-honored tradition and stuff like that. But the way that we were treated on my first deployment, when we got on ship and I would see sailors like shoulder check Marines and stuff like that, and just fuck with us, just like not help the Marines out when they needed stuff, cut off chow so that they couldn't eat. When they're in line, they'd tell them, "Sorry, chow's closed," shit like that. I was like, I'm not going to have some fucking fat piece of shit first class try to haze me so I can earn the right to get their little certificate. I'm like, fuck them, man. Like the way that, and I was super, I don't, honestly, I think I was so aggravated about it and made it, known that I think almost my entire team, no one did the crossing the line ceremony on my shit because they were like, yeah, like they got it. It's like, how could you want me to respect your like traditions and your time honored traditions and stuff like that when the entire time we're on this ship, you just treat us like shit and like we're second class citizens. And I don't regret it. I wish I had the cool certificate because the certificate's cool. It's a super, I don't know if you've got one or if you've ever did it or seen it.
I did. I definitely want to come back to some of that stuff too,
but I'm just like, I'm not going to do it, man. I don't respect them anymore. There's Navy personnel that I respect, but as a whole, I think the Navy is kind of garbage. And I think they treat their junior sailors and stuff, and junior Marines that are embarked on their ships like shit. Yeah. And I think it's inappropriate. That's my opinion.
I definitely have some opinions or some experiences to share with you about my MU deployments too. I'll come back to some of those sentiments too, because I saw it from the officer side, and I'll definitely come back to that.
Go ahead. I mean, I'm done with my little try. My little.
I was gonna finish up the 511 thing but we were talking about the chafing thing and guys coming back and everything else. Oh, yeah. I also remember the chafing thing. I'm gonna weave a funny story into this too, but one of the biggest chafing things I saw as a brand new lieutenant. I mean, like, I was out of the schoolhouse for all of, let's just call it 6 weeks when this happened, right? Mm-hmm. It was the summertime. I remember it was the summertime because who can forget a summer in 29 Palms? And they had the awards ceremony, right? And they gave each battery commander a Bronze Star with a Combat V, right? Now, I mean, I don't think anybody up until that point had gotten a Bronze Star with a Combat V from since Vietnam, right? Because we're talking like there was nothing happened, right? Maybe a couple dudes in Grenada or Panama, but like no of significance, right? And that's when I started to hear the grumbling and started to become very sensitive about the awards process and the awards system, which is probably better now, but was bad back then. So you've got 4 battery commanders, and I'm not taking anything away from their leadership, right? Mm-hmm. But they led their batteries. They weren't out there doing anything that I consider to be of valor. Maybe Rob Davis, because he was dealing with that bomb situation.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then that's more of like a management of a situation than it is like valor, right?
Yeah.
But then there were guys who like went on that raid and did the stuff that was valor. And so when they sent that raid up there was and I know the story because, I heard it from the lieutenants, but there was a conversation about how dangerous that raid was going to be because they were sending 609s up to the border, firing a battery, whatever, and then coming back, mm-hmm. right? And everybody was worried that, Saddam Hussein's army was, very formidable, and this was a very dangerous action. Yeah. So they made the decision that the raid force commander, I'm just going to use that term, the officer who was in charge of those 6 howitzers to go on that raid was the junior second lieutenant in the battery.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they were scared that he was going to get killed.
Jeez.
Yeah, so they were like, we're going to take the junior Marine and we're going to put him in charge of this thing, and because we can't lose a battery commander up on the border as we're getting ready to go through the berm, right?
Yeah.
And so they sent this guy. His name is Eric Crudo. They sent Eric up. He was the, I don't know if he was the junior second, but he was a junior lieutenant. He was not the XO or anything.
Yeah.
And off he goes and he does this thing. He does this whole raid. He comes back. And what do you think he gets?
What do you got, like a NAM? Right?
He got a NAM with a V.
Fuck yeah.
And that's a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
A NAM with a V. Unheard of. And I remember thinking and there was so much chafing about all of that. Like, here are all the officers getting awards. And I remember hearing it and I remember thinking to myself, of course, I can't say anything. I don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
But the grumbling started. This is where I'll tie a funny story in too. So they have this, we're out on the grinder at 29 Palms and they've got the bleacher set up and everybody's families are there too. And in 29 Palms, like if you've been there, you've been stationed there, or any of your listeners, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you got the sliding scale rule with chicks up there, right? Like a normal 7 is like a 10 up there, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this very attractive woman who was sitting in the bleachers of right square across from our platoon, right? And so all the Marines are ribbing me. They're like, "Hey, sir, I think she's checking you out," all that kind of stuff. Or, all right, hey, knock it off, guys, that kind of thing. And then afterwards, there was an officer's call, a staff and officers call up in like the battalion conference room to like a little smaller ceremony for like the wives and people to come, like the battery commanders' wives and everything. And they were walking around with their Bronze Stars on and everything. And there was a keg and all this stuff. And I'm sitting there talking. I'm hanging out with Garrison, my platoon sergeant, and a couple of his other platoon sergeants. And the sergeant major is in there. And the sergeant major was like this grizzly old Vietnam vet, infantry guy, Purple Heart, 2 Purple Hearts. Like his name was Sergeant Major Eve. He was just a bigger than life kind of character to the lieutenants, because lieutenants were scared of him. And he is talking to who's obviously his wife and the woman who was sitting in the bleachers across from all of us. And all of a sudden he turns around and looks right at Garrison and I, because we're standing at the keg like good second lieutenant and platoon sergeant would on a Friday afternoon. And he points right at me and he goes, "That one?" And I was like, "Oh, whoa." And she goes, "Dad." And he goes, and he starts walking over to us, right? And here's Garrison. He's got like a cup with a beer in it. He goes like this. He's like, "I'm out of here, sir. Later." He's like, "You're on your own."
Fucking ditched you.
I was like,
"Thanks, buddy."
Garrison, like, fuck, So Sergeant Major walks over. He goes, "Lieutenant," because he sure as he doesn't call me sir, right? He's like, "Lieutenant, for some God unknown reason, my daughter wants to meet you." It's like, holy shit, this is so bad, right? So I'm over like, "Hi, how are you?" Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I ended up dating her for like a year. And that was kind of like one of the funny stories that like has just gone on with my lieutenant crew for a long time, was how, they had this big award ceremony and everything. And, I ended up, like the girl I was dating at the time was the daughter of our battalion sergeant major. And that was like this big thing. Like everybody was all over my ass about that. And it was
that's pretty funny.
Story.
That's funny that he like introduced you though. I'm surprised he even did that. It was a different time then though.
It definitely was. And he was such a good guy too. He was one of those guys that would like come grab me in the battery office and take me to lunch. Like not just me. I mean, he would do that to lieutenants. Like he was invested in junior officer leadership too. And he always gave me a hard time, but he was another guy who was just really kind of influential to me in the early part of my career. But funny story woven in with the chafing of that whole thing. Like that was a big deal, the whole award system thing, and that caused a lot of chafing with the Marines too. So that, and like the coming back and playing the catch me fuck me games in Garrison and all that stuff,
it's still a big deal, honestly. Yeah. It's the award system. I'm of the belief that I don't think officers should get awards. I think I just don't think it's a good idea to give officers awards. I think that because I think awards cause some people to do stuff that they wouldn't do if they didn't think they were going to get an award for it. You know what I'm saying? It drives people to make stupid choices just so that they can get a fucking piece of cloth. I've seen, we had guys come down from it was like the RTC or RCT or maybe the MEF come down to our FOB in Marja, and I remember there was like an intel officer, and on their convoy back out after they left the FOB, they were there for a couple of days. I don't remember what it was for. This guy takes a shot from the turret because he said he identified a target that was aiming at him or something like that. Shit like that. It's like, dude, no one else, no shots, no one else in the convoy saw it. Like, and then he put himself up for his combat action ribbon.
That was the other thing too, was the combat action ribbon. Good God. Yeah.
Wow. It's shit like that. And then I've talked about it. I talked about it in a couple of the first episodes. I think I did it in the first episode where I did one by myself, like when I was first started the podcast, and I didn't want to have a week without a podcast. So it's like episode, let me look here. I got it right in front of me. I talk about Lance Corporal Lamel, who was on my fire support team when I was attached to 3-6. I think episode 8, I talk about it. And either episode 8 or 10, I think. Anyway, Lance Corporal Lamel, they got ambushed in Afghanistan in Western Marja. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the area. It's Sistani. And they got ambushed, and they got ambushed with RPGs and saws. Taliban dudes had previously attacked a British convoy or something like that, and one of the vehicles was like an armory vehicle, so they recovered a bunch of British weapons, and one of them was a saw. And I remember being in the 3-6 FSCC and getting a call like, hey, this unit's in contact, and I didn't know it was Lamel, and hey, these guys are in contact. Here's the location. Here's our pause rep. Here's the direction and distance to contact. And I've been working in the command center for months, right? And every time somebody would give us a direction and distance, it was never right. It was sometimes, every once in a while it'd be maybe kind of close, but a lot of times it was like completely wrong. Or, when we looked, we didn't see anything because the people had already gone. We get a direction and distance. I plot it on my map and I pull up a grid. I pull up an 8-digit grid, give it to my S2 guys who have a Reaper on station, who are talking to a Reaper that's on station. Mm-hmm. And they pass it to them and they zoom in on that grid and it's the exact location. Right. And we got 3 guys on 2 different motorbikes. They're finishing up the little ambush, trying to get on the motorbikes and run away. We end up doing a strike and taking out 2 of them. And I was like, dude, even that's 2 guys, like, dude, that location was like spot on. I was like, dude, that was sick. I was like, I bet that was my observer. I bet that was Lamel. I was like, I bet he's got a laser rangefinder. And I talked to him. He comes up to the FOB a couple days later. He came down to the headquarters. And I was like, dude, was that you out there on this date? And he's like, yeah, it was me. I was like, do you use your Vector Dagger, the laser rangefinder, and the GPS? Yeah. And he's like, no. He's like, I didn't bring it, Sergeant. He's like, I didn't bring it. He's like, but he's like, once we started taking contact, he's like, we dove down behind a berm and he popped up and shot a direction with his compass and did a range estimation. And it was like spot on. And,
wow.
And he didn't get an award for it. His squad leader had that action, what Lamel did, written up into his award to get a Navy Com with a V for the deployment. And I didn't even realize it. I remember we were standing in the formation when I was watching this dude get a Navy Com with a V, and then afterwards Lamel was like, "That's the shit in the warrant, the write up." He's like, "That was the shit I did," and I'm like, "Oh, no way," because I couldn't remember a specific date and action.
Yeah.
But I was just like, no way, dude. Like, that's fucked up. And because I had mentioned after it happened, I told my captain, I was like, we need to get an award for Lamel. I was like, he did his job under fire. Like, perfect. Like, that's the best thing we've gotten the whole time. And we got to take out 2 bad guys because of it. And he's like, dude, he's with Weapons Company. Like, that's on the company commander to write up an award. And he's like, but I'll talk to him. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then I I'm a sergeant. I don't know how to do an award or anything like that. I've never done anything like that. And so I'm like, all right, they got it. And then nothing ever comes of it. And he didn't get an award. Yeah. I'm just like, he didn't even get I think he got a letter of appreciation, maybe. He might not have even gotten that, And I'm just like, and you hear stories like that. There's people that we look at awards the wrong way sometimes. Some people see an award and think it has to be tied. Like, this level of award should be tied to this kind of combat action or whatever. A lot of issues that people have on the ground combat side is they see people that are on the support side getting a lot of awards for what they think is just doing their job. Mm-hmm. And I don't disagree. I think that definitely happens. I think it happens on both sides. But the award system is fucked up. I still think the Marine Corps is better than like the Army. The Army gives out awards for everything. I remember going to a guy's house one time that was in the Army, and he had a Bronze Star citation on the wall, and his was for being the platoon sergeant in Iraq. It didn't have a V on it, but it was a Bronze Star for being a platoon sergeant, like doing normal platoon sergeant actions. Yeah. As like a support guy, like working in the office. He had got a Bronze Star, and I'm like, what the fuck,
Yeah, it's crazy. I see, like, I've got a friend of mine, and his son is in the Air Force, and I'm looking at a picture of him the other day on Instagram, and he's been in 2.5 years, and he's got the Air Force Commendation Medal with like 2 oak leaf clusters. He's got 3 of them already. Yeah, I'm like, all right, that's crazy. And you hit on a good thing. This is a little bit of a, like, if I was the commandant for a day kind of thing, what would you change? You kind of hit on something that will probably piss a lot of my officer friends off when I say this, but my personal opinion is that Bronze Star without a V that just shouldn't exist. Yeah. It just shouldn't exist. Like, great, you got a Bronze Star for being the watch officer. I mean, like, I don't get that. I don't understand why that award exists.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, they've kept the sanctity of the Silver Star and all that. So like that's got to be a valor thing. But the whole V, no V on the Bronze Star, like if I was the commandant for today, I'd be like, hey, listen, if you did a great job as the watch officer in combat, you get a meritorious service medal. I mean, I'm using that as an example because it's kind of like the same.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
But you know what I mean? Like, there are already awards that exist for doing your job in a combat zone that has nothing to do with valor.
Yeah.
Why do we make this whole thing up about the Bronze Star? And here's the other thing too. If I was a commandant for a day, well, I could spend the next 3 hours talking about it if I was commandant of the day, right? But this whole awards thing, like, to me, as an officer, I wish that somebody said to me, "Hey, Dave, like Patton, right? He walked around with a box of medals,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're the company commander. You're the battery commander. You're the battalion commander. You have the authority to award anything you want up to and including a Bronze Star with a combat V at your discretion." Like, could you imagine how quickly the awards situation be fixed?
Yeah.
If you got a battery commander like Lamel, just goes down and he's like, "Hey, awesome job, pff, done."
Yeah.
Right? I don't think it would take an award system and inflate it at all. I think it would actually start to recognize the people that need to get recognized, because it's the administrative morass of the award system that cheats guys out of it, right? Like Peralta, right?
Mm-hmm.
Navy
Yeah.
Cross. Like, it is an administrative morass that has kept him from getting a Medal of Honor. My opinion. I wasn't there and I don't know anything. So all I know is what I read. But when I read that, I think to myself, well, if there's an action that warrants the Medal of Honor, that sure seems like it to me.
Yeah.
So why can't that just happen, right? I will challenge you a little bit though on the officer award things, because there are some officers out there has done some like, I think his first name's Brian Chawatash, who got the Navy Cross in the march up, like running down or Todd DeGrossier, who got a Silver Star in Fallujah for, basically rounding up a bunch of dudes and just going in and killing people as a quick reaction force. I mean, like, there are some officers out there that have done some amazingly heroic things.
Yeah, but the expectation is the officer is going to do that anyway. Your expectation is that they're going to lead and make things like that happen anyway. Yeah. I would say that I would be cool with, like, Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, and then leave it at that. But, like, personal awards in general, I think should be an enlisted thing, because that's a way of recognizing the enlisted guys, because we don't get the same kind of perks like an officer gets for just being, an officer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's in this day and age, the word privileges have become very used. And yeah, so there's
quit putting your officer privilege on me, Jesus.
I get exactly right. Yeah, exactly. I need to check my officer privilege
for sure.
It does exist, and I was kind of thinking about that in my head when you were talking about the MEU and everything. Yeah, I don't remember where we were in all of that, but the combat action ribbon was definitely like a big deal when I was at 511, and they had all come back too, because basically everybody in the unit got it. There was no he said, she said. There was none of that. Yeah. It was if you cross this line, you got the combat action ribbon. That was it, right? And then when so everybody just got it. There was no controversy about that at all. The first time I ever saw the controversy happen was when we went to Somalia. Because that was not a, hey, you're there, you get the combat action. Like, you had to be engaged, you had to do something.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I ever saw, like, the by name roster thing happen. And I didn't even know it was going on at the time, but there were a couple of raids and direct action missions and some fights in the city where the units were fighting. And then there was sort of like hey, we need a roster of everybody who was on that raid. And I'm just thinking, like, that's just like typical Marine Corps roster thing, Yeah. And you don't write somebody up for the combat action ribbon, right? I don't think you write somebody up. Maybe you do now. But,
there's a write up and a submission process, but I don't think it's the same as like a NAM or something like that. I think it's different.
There's no summary of action and all.
Well, I think there's like a summary of action of what happened, and then you attach that list of people that were there when it happened.
Right, yeah. And so I had no idea that process was even going on, and it wasn't until 2 years later that my ANGLICO commander called me into his office and was like, hey, we got this in the mail today, and you've been awarded the combat action ribbon. I was like, what? Like, I had no idea it was even happening. I didn't even know that that's how it worked.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. No, the
So
way I saw it in 511 was everybody got it or everybody didn't get it, and so I thought, well, we didn't get it, so that's how it works,
yeah,
But
it's so that's one of those awards that have kind of over time, it's up to the combatant commander of their decision on what the criteria is for it. I know for I think the like general like base requirement is you were in combat and you did your job, successfully. It didn't,
yeah,
and then it morphed into like they had to shoot at you and then you had to shoot back, or that was like the understanding, but that wasn't like the actual letter of the award. It was like, hey, you just performed because if I'm a radio operator attached to a lieutenant, I'm probably on my radio and shit
right.
back. I'm not, but I'm helping the fight, but I may not actively be firing back, which I get. So I get that.
That's how I remember it. Yeah.
The combat action ribbon is one of those ones where people, it's like once you get it, you're like, thank God, I don't have to worry about it anymore. And because people judge you, like for sure, that's like one of the first ribbons people look for if they see you, in your uniform. And then some guys are douchebags about it and give other dudes shit that don't have one. And I'm like, dude, who cares, man? I had a buddy hit me up while I was still in Afghanistan, and he's like, man, everyone's gonna have. All of our friends are going to have a combat action ribbon with me. And I'm like, honestly, bro, I could care less because I almost got shot in the fucking head yesterday. And like, it's not cool. Like it's, after a little bit of time, maybe that first engagement you're in is like, oh shit, that was crazy. But after a couple months of doing that, you're just like, Jesus, let me get the fuck out of here. Like, this is not fucking fun, especially when you have a close call. It's just one of those things.
It's also weird. Here's another one too. And I'm going to lightly touch on this because I don't want to malign anybody's service, but like, there's also a part of me that like, when I see Kyle Carpenter with his Medal of Honor and his Purple Heart on, right? Like, that's a fucking Purple Heart, dude. I mean, right? And again, I'm not going to get too deep into this, but I know officers who are walking around with Purple Hearts, and I'm like, not the same thing.
Yeah.
Not even close, And by letter of the law, I guess whatever it was that happened, I'm thinking of one guy in particular. I'm like, man, I don't know. Those things are there. There should be levels or something like.
I actually sat in. I think it was 3-6's Purple Heart ceremony. I was at the Purple Heart ceremony after our deployment. And there were some guys, they did it at the base theater, so we were all sitting in, our seats or whatever. And they lined up like 8 or 10 guys, however many guys were getting it from the battalion. And there were rumblings around me like, that dude doesn't fucking deserve it. Like, oh, he was like in the vehicle behind the one that got hit by an AD. Like, oh, he must have got a head. Like dudes were shit talking. And it's like, and on one hand, you're like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like maybe he earned it. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe something I don't know. Like, I don't know, man. I think we just like to argue about stupid shit, and and awards is one of those things that
awards is one of them. Yep.
And an award like a Purple Heart is a huge deal because it's not just an award for some people. For some people, it's like a way to pay for their kids to go to college. A way for there's a lot of fringe benefits from getting an award like that. You're part of the Purple Heart Society or whatever the name of it is, and like. You get free license plates, like there's things that come with stuff like that. And I don't know. Awards is a tenuous, it's a very crazy,
it is
touchy subject that some people get too wrapped around it. And some people, I don't know. People make it too big of a deal. I think we should get rid of some awards. And again, I think higher ups, officers especially, shouldn't be receiving awards unless it's like for a situation like you were talking about. I can't remember his name. The guy at the beginning of the war in Iraq.
I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Yeah.
Who was picking up AKs because he'd ran out of his own ammo to continue clearing that trench. Or going through.
Yeah.
Which is just, that story is incredible. But anyway, so you were talking about being in Somalia. Who were you in Somalia with?
So this was when I was in 511. So my quick tour duty at 511 was I started out in the battery position, but then I ended up getting sent out on the liaison team, and this is back when again 511 is still in 29 Palm, so it was part of RCT 7.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was not a direct support battalion. It didn't directly support an infantry regiment, right? Like 311 support 7th Marines kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we had this loose arrangement where we were the direct support, quote unquote, to the old 3rd Tank Battalion, which is what they were back then,
Okay.
and 3rd LAR, which called LAI back then, right? So um, we would go out when either one of those battalions or the entire RCT went out. 511 would roll out with them, and I became the artillery liaison officer, and then later the fire support coordinator for 3rd Tank Battalion, which is now 1st Tank Battalion. They just switched the flag, right?
Mm-hmm. Which is now
Um,
going away also.
I know, right? Crazy. We could talk about that too. But this was back um, like right after the Gulf War. So I was in the Fire Support Coordination Center for 3rd Tanks, and this is where I think I was telling you this yesterday, like the whole, like I was there. I was sitting right there when the whole idea of starting Steel Knight started. Like
Hmm.
I'm a plank holder of Steel Knight. Like I'm one of the original 5 dudes that conceptualized the whole thing. And here's how Steel Knight started. I'm going to get to the Somalia thing in a second through this story, but like Steel Knight started with an air officer, a FAC, and a fire support coordinator getting together, and a fire support and the air officer for 3rd Tank saying like, "Hey, I've got a ton of contacts. I know these squadrons that are looking to come out and drop bombs. We're going to take 3rd Tank Battalion out. And we're going to do a big CAS exercise, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And then they had all these aircraft that wanted to come in and do bombs and all of this stuff. And then it just exploded when the word got out, right? So then all of a sudden it became this RCT-7 thing. And at the time, the RCT commanding officer was a guy named Buck Bedard. He's sort of famous in my generation, kind of a hardcore guy. And his fire support coordinator was a guy named Top Zeliniak. Some of your older listeners will definitely know Top Z. And Top Z was at 311. And we went out, we did this huge Steel Knight exercise. We could talk about more of that if you want to, but I ended up getting a really great relationship built with the guys from 3rd Tank Battalion because every time we went to the field, Armstrong was out there rolling with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Somalia thing happened, I don't know what kind of decision-making process went into what units got to go, but I think a lot of it was driven by what sort of gear is on the MPF shipping that's going to come into the port once the MEU comes in and seizes the port. So 311 got the word that they were going because RCT-7 was going. So 1st LAR Battalion was going, 1-7 was going, and 3rd Tank Battalion was going. So as soon as 3rd Tank Battalion got the word that they were going, they called down to 511. At this point, we had moved down to Camp Pendleton and said, "Hey, we need our artillery liaison officer. We're deploying." So I got called into my battalion commander's office. Like, "Hey, you and one other dude from 511 and 3 other dudes from 211 and one other guy from 111. You're going to be the artillery liaison. You're going to be the fire support section for 3rd Tank Battalion. And so get in the white, 15 pack van tomorrow. You're going up to 311. You're going TAD to 311." I was like, okay, cool. I mean, that was exciting to me. So I ended up going up, and I knew Top Zeliniak, and I knew Lieutenant Colonel Lesnowitz, who was the commanding officer at the time, and went up there and attached to 311. So I actually deployed with 311 as an attachment.
Okay.
To be the fire support coordinator, artillery, whatever you want to call it, for 3rd Tank Battalion, until they didn't go. So I end up going over to Somalia with 311, and I was just sitting around waiting for the tank battalion to show up, and they never showed up. But what did happen was they had sent over an advance party from 3rd Tank Battalion, and that was enough to like cobble together 2 or 3 tank crews. So they actually brought 2 or 3 tanks off the MPF shipping and had them rolling around downtown Mogadishu. So here I was sitting around with nothing to do, and they created this thing called Task Force Mogadishu, which was run by a colonel who had already been selected from 1-star. His name was, I think his first name was Jack. His last name was Klimp. Colonel Klimp was the task force commander. And then Buck Bedard was up in Baidoa. And the whole idea was like when he came back, he was going to take over the task force, and it was truly going to be like the RCT-7 task force. But they had this weird thing set up. We were in the stadium. Like if you remember from the movie Black Hawk Down, the stadium at the end of the movie, that's where we were all there. And I got assigned a liaison chief who had spent his entire time at ANGLICO, like his career at ANGLICO. And his name was Long Henry. I can't remember his first name. We're still on Facebook together. I'm going to feel bad that I can't remember his first name, but Gunny Long Henry, who had like no patience for any of the, regular artillery world bullshit.
Yeah.
Had spent his, and so here's a guy in 1991 already had like 3 combat action ribbons, right? He was like
Oh, geez.
Grenada, Panama, Gulf War, right? I'm like, whoa, this guy's like, and he was all Anglico,
That's
right?
like a
And
unicorn.
right, I know. And so that's where I first started to really figure out like Anglico sounded really cool because he'd be talking about Anglico all the time. And so yeah, I went to Mogadishu, and because they didn't really have a job for me, I ended up attached to the task force. And that's when Colonel Klimp, well, through the operations officer, basically said like, "Hey, we've got this artillery section here. I want to get them out with 1-7 and 3rd LAR." And so I basically became a rent-a-FO, right,
Oh, yeah.
to go out on all these raids. And because of my history with Rob Davis and the whole 113 thing,
Mm-hmm.
I demanded to deploy with a Prick 113 out of our comm shop from 511, and the CO let me do it. So I had a Prick 113, which is the UHF radio, right?
Yeah.
Right. So if you have a UHF radio back then, and you could talk to an airplane, you were a huge commodity to any maneuver commander.
Yeah.
So the word started getting out, and people were like grabbing me and taking me out on these things. I ended up like going on the Bakar Arms Market raid with Charlie 17 and did a huge cantonment area raid. And then I mean, this was like, I was telling you yesterday, like, I don't even know if the word urban CAS existed at that point, right?
Yeah.
It was back in the day, my only exposure to TACP at that point was I was the FO on the hill at the top of the Delta T, calling in the marking rounds for the TACP school class that was coming in from LFTC PAC or whatever they called it back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of picked up the lingo of listening to these guys on the radio, and I was calling in the missions and everything. And then when they had some extra air, they were like, "Hey, Armstrong, you want to try this thing out?" Right? So here comes my officer privilege, right? So I get to, I get to get on the radio, and I'm like, "Hey, from the mark, West 100 kind of thing," and like reading the 9 line and all that stuff. And so I picked up the lingo. I kind of got it, and I sat for a week and just watched all this happen. So I understood all of this stuff. And it was the first time that I almost died. We were actually on the hill doing that TACP shoot, and this was when they were transitioning the F-14 Tomcats over with their bombing package.
Mm-hmm.
And an F-14 came in and like didn't have the target, like wasn't cleared hot, but dropped the bomb anyway, and it literally hit the backside of our OP, man. It was like the only reason we didn't get hurt was because of the geometry of the hill. We were over here, and the bomb hit here, so everything went like this over our heads. Right?
What kind of bomb?
It was a 500-pounder live. It was a live 500-pounder. Yeah.
That's so sketchy, dude.
Yeah, that was. I remember that was the first time I was like, okay, that's what happens when people don't have good target location and don't have good eyes on the aircraft, and people are dropping bombs out being cleared hot, and not aborting aircraft because they can't see them and that kind of thing. Like, I didn't realize what I was learning at the time.
Yeah.
And then I end up over there in Somalia, and I'm the guy with I'm the one guy with the radio that can talk to the airplanes. And I remember then Lieutenant Colonel Neller was the battalion commander for 3rd LAR Battalion. So he was the battalion commander for this raid.
Mm-hmm.
And he attached me to an infantry platoon out of 1-7. And I was like the guy that was going to control medevacs or anything like that. And we get into like a scrap with the people there. There's some gunfire going on like that. Everybody's kind of getting down. We're spreading the perimeter out, and all of a sudden on my radio there are 2 Cobras that check in off the MEU, right? And they're like, "Hey, it's gunfighter. We're here for work," or whatever their call sign was. And I'm like, I have no idea what?
Yeah.
And like, wait a second. I don't even have GPS. Where the fuck am I? Like, I'm taking the map out. I'm like, all right, I think I'm here. Like, this was a disaster. Like, I was scared to death, right?
Oh, I can't imagine, but that's crazy.
Yeah. And so now, and I'm telling you this in hindsight, I got 2 trigger happy gunships coming in that they're going to fire off a tow missile for the first time since Vietnam.
Yeah.
These guys, they were so ready to get in the fight. And and the company commander comes down. It turns out that what they thought was a technical was coming up this road that they couldn't see. The company commander comes there. He's like, I need you to get those aircraft to get eyes on this technical coming up the road. Roger that, sir. So I get on. I'm like, hey, gunfighter, this is like, I don't know, I made up a fucking call sign. I didn't even have one, you know. I was like, I used my nickname from college, which actually ended up becoming my call sign. I was like, hey, yeah, gunfighter, this is Belly down here on the ground. I'm like talking to him, like not even using correct radio procedures. I'm like, hey, I'm in the northwest corner of this thing, and I just got a word that there's a technical coming up this road. They're like, Roger that, we're rolling in hot. I'm like, whoa, I hear this word rolling in hot, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing I think of is that bomb from the F-14. Right. Like I remember guys getting screamed at for clearing hot when they couldn't see an aircraft. I'm like, negative, abort. You're not cleared hot. Like that was my first time I ever did that. And they're like, hey, so we have this technical in sight. Are we cleared to engage the target? And I'm like, I don't have eyes on you. Like, where are you? So they're like, hey, they gave me some sort of cardinal direction. I look off, I kind of see them. And I'm smart enough to know that the geometry of this thing is all wrong, because if they start shooting from wherever they were, like, and they shoot long, it's coming right into us, right?
Yeah.
They were coming at us head on. And I remember getting on the radio. I'm like, hey, negative. You need to come around totally different. Like I've got a visual on you, but like you're 180 out. I need you to come around and run in. Like I need you to get geometry coming in from the other way. They're Roger that. So I'm watching these helicopters come around, and I'm pointing up at the sky, like the Pink Floyd album. So I'm looking up in the air, and I'm watching these guys, and I see the canopy, the birds tilted, and looking down, and they're telling me that they see this thing, and the company commander is telling me like, you're clear to take them out, Armstrong. I'm like, oh dear God, what am I about to do? So they come in and they're like, hey, we see it. Are we cleared hot? I was like, you're not cleared hot until your wings level. Like you're still turning, right?
Yeah.
It does negative. I need you to push out about a mile and come in on a straight attack heading so I can see. And I'm not even using the proper terminology. I'm like, I need you to come in on a line that's, straight and over our shoulders. Like, so they come in and they're, helicopter wings level. They're coming in on this line, and he keeps asking me if he's cleared hot, and I don't see the target yet. So long story a little bit short, this target comes around the corner, and it's the back end of a pickup truck that's being used as a trailer, being drugged by two donkeys that's got like 15 civilians in it.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff. God.
Right. And I'm like, abort. And so nothing happened, thank God. Right.
Yeah.
No Bronze Star, by the way, for the officer on that one. So just so you know, right? That's a joke.
So, if you would have gotten the strike, you probably would have gotten one.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, we could all use a little levity. So yeah, that was like this major learning lesson. I'm like, and I'd never heard the term urban CAS, like not that back in the day. CAS was like, hey, from the Willie Pete West 100, like that's how you did it back then. And there was no Willie Pete. There was nothing else. I'm just talking to these airplanes. And man, that was a lesson. And you talk about like PTSD. I'm going to use this term very loosely, but I'm not going to use that term. I'm going to use this. That had an emotional impact on me that has lasted me my entire life.
Yeah.
Like the fear of being seconds away from unleashing a tow missile that could have killed 15 people. And I think I'm like, that makes my heart skip a beat even telling the story. And like, and I can only imagine the guilt that I would be living with. Like, I feel horrible just retelling the story. I didn't even do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So like, yeah, back to your thing about the guy sitting in the fob, like you just never know what's going to like touch somebody off, and that was such a formative time in my life. And I hadn't even gone to ANGLICO yet. And that was like, I remember that being the time in my life where I was like, I'm getting out. I am not going to die in this shithole that isn't going to change a damn thing. How would my parents ever feel about me dying here when my death would just have nothing to do with changing anything about this stupid country? It's a place is a shithole. And that's why I was like, I'm getting out. Before
you get on to your decision to get out or stay in, most people only know about Mogadishu and Black Hawk Down. Like that's the only event that most people can recall, unless they know someone that was there that's told them about it, or like you were actually there. How long were we in Mogadishu in that area, and what kind of, like you said, you went on a bunch of raids. what kind of raids were you doing? Like, what was the target? Like, can you kind of get into that a little bit to give a little bit of backgrounds for people that may not know anything about Mogadishu?
Sure. So rough window of time there for Marine involvement in Mogadishu was, let's call it December of 91. I'm sorry, December of 92 to March of 93. So a relatively short period of time, right? Enough for everybody to get their sea service deployment ribbon, but not much more than that, right? And there was a couple of Marine components that were involved in the initial Mogadishu thing. There was the MEU that came in. I think it was the 15th MEU. The commander of that MEU was Newbold, I think. And then 13th, 15th, it wasn't the 11th MEU. That's all I know. They did like a raid. They came in, and if you Google the footage of this was like when Cristiano Amirpour was set up on the beach with all the lights, interviewing the recon teams that were coming in on the rubber boats to do like their hydro recon for the landing force, right? Like disaster, just awful. And so the MEU came in, and I'm probably 80% right on this. The MEU came in and like basically captured the airfield, which was right on the beach. If you Google Mogadishu airport, you'll see it's like right on the beach. So the MEU came in and like established the airfield, and then that's when, and I think they also went over and established security at the port that would allow the MPF shipping to come in. So they kind of went in and did those two things. Typical MEU mission, right? Like going and seize. Then the planes started coming in. And that's how I came in. So I flew in on like a tower airplane with 311, got there, like walked down off the thing. And I know this is going to sound a little dramatic, but like literally in the background, I walk off the plane and there's like tracers going and rocket tails. And I'm looking, I'm like, whoa, holy shit. Like it was like
this is different.
Yeah, well, it was like what I watched on TV when I was at Fort Sill of the Gulf War.
Yeah.
Like it kind of reminded me of that. And I was like, this is, wow, okay, this is weird. I'm flying in on like a 747 and walking down this thing with my sea bag, and there's like bullets going, not at the plane, off in the distance in the city, like not anywhere to see them. And whoa, so 311 got their guns off the MPF shipping, so they set up a battalion at the airfield to fire, the howitzers, and everybody else flew in too. So like LAR, I think it was 17. I'm almost positive it was 17 that flew in. I don't think 17 came off the MEU, but 17 was there with us, and then a couple other cats and dogs. And I apologize to any listeners if I'm not remembering your unit, but there were other units there as well, but they were basically all captured underneath this Task Force Mogadishu.
Was the Army units that were there already there, or did they come in as like a backfill too?
Yeah, they came in as a backfill. So our mission was very loosely defined, right? Our mission was feed starving people and try to eliminate the friction between these three warlords. Everybody's name I don't remember, like Adid and maybe a couple other people. And so there were these factions that were fighting, and basically they were using food as like a weapon. They were using the food that they were controlling coming in from the port as a way to like get people to be on their side.
Sorry.
Right? Yeah, to get people to be on their side.
Yeah.
So we came in and we said, all right, not we, Dave Armstrong, but somebody said, okay, if we're going to eventually rebuild the country of Somalia, we need to protect the military equipment because we will stand up an army and all this kind of stuff. So they told these warlords, if you put the military equipment into these cantonment areas and leave it, we will not destroy it. But the minute you start taking it out of these cantonment areas, we're taking it down. You're done, right? So the first week or two was okay. We were running some patrols. And then things started getting
foot
bad.
Patrols or mounted patrols?
Foot patrols. And 311 was doing foot patrols. So 311 actually took the first casualty over there on a patrol. This guy named, his name was PFC Domingo Arroyo. He was from Elizabeth, New Jersey. And he was killed on a foot patrol, as an artilleryman. I'm pretty sure he was an artilleryman, but he was in 311. He was killed on a foot patrol. And that was the beginning. That was when everybody started to realize, like, okay, this is not a training exercise. Like, we just lost a Marine in a firefight in the middle of the street. And and they started to figure out like we were debasing, that may not be the right word, destabilizing the situation, because we were now in control of the food. We were running these food convoys up to Baidoa, which is like 90 miles outside of Mogadishu, and bringing these food convoys up there. So like LAR was running convoys up to Baidoa and Baidera.
And very deliberately putting it out rather than letting the warlords control the flow of the
That's
food.
right. Yeah. So there were these big UN trucks, like white trucks with the blue letters on the side, and we, the Marines, would provide security for those food trucks going up to these food distribution sites in the outlying towns. And like, I went along on one of those as part of the security element, and like, was literally handing bags of rice out to people that looked like they hadn't eaten in 5 years. Like living in.
Yeah.
I'm kidding you. Like I had pictures of straw huts.
It's real quick. I want to just touch on that. I've had the conversation a few times with people. I'm like, it's hard for you to understand the plight of other nations until you're in an area where you have to be deliberate about giving out food and water, because if you're not, you'll get swarmed very quickly by people that are just, starving, or, there's in like Africa, like being in Africa and seeing like the UN refugee camp and stuff like that. These are people that just don't have enough food and water. And it's like, you can't just hand out a bottle of water to a couple people, because then all of a sudden,
no way. Oh yeah.
So I think that's a good point to bring up, how, this is it sounds like a military action, like a very deliberate military action with security, but it's a requirement, because if not, the people that are trying to hand out food will either be swarmed, or, it's just like it's a crazy thing that we as Americans who, live what we think are rough lives, but I can go to the grocery store right now and we have a meat shortage, but I can still go pick up steaks if I want. Like it's a completely different world in somewhere like
People
that.
don't get it. Yeah, they don't get it. And you're right, like that we learned very quickly about the mob, kind of thing, because nobody had any experience in anything like Mogadishu at that point. It was, a bunch of officers that either grew up in Vietnam or trained to fight the Fulda Gap, or a linear battlefield in Iraq where there was good guys on one side and bad guys on the other side, and there was a straight line between us, like, and all of a sudden you're in this asymmetric environment. And it was the first time I ever heard of anybody saying just because they have a gun doesn't mean they're the enemy. What?
Yeah,
like, what? I mean, like, that was just such a mind-blowing thing. And then it started to get bad, because then the warlords were like, hey, the Americans are kind of destabilizing our power, so we need to start fighting back the Americans and put them back in their box. So that's when the equipment started rolling out of the cantonment areas. Like they were going in and taking the technicals out and stuff like that. They there was one time where we went out, they actually they rolled a tank out of the, like an old Soviet tank. They rolled an old Soviet tank out of the cantonment area, and that's when we got the order, like, hey, we're going to this section of the city and we're gonna this equipment and the technicals and everything out. And there was like I didn't control it, but there was a Cobra that came in off the Mew, fired a tow missile into this tank. I actually still have the newspaper clipping that my parents sent me from it, like just schwacked a tank in the middle of downtown Mogadishu. And so like there was some skirmishes, and then we did another raid on the cantonment area. We were like, okay, we're going to go into this cantonment area, and we are going to militarily destroy all of the equipment. And I've got these great pictures of they had a battery like of 9 or 8s that we had given them, I guess, in like what you would like the covered kind of things. And all you could see from the satellite imagery was the 9 or 8s all lined up in the cantonment area, and we had no idea what was going on with them. And we get there, and they're like, they've taken the tires off of them. They've taken the spades and turned them into like blocks, like where the tires came off. You block of where the tires come off. Like these things were not like
usable at all.
They were not. There wasn't a master guns in the artillery community that could have brought any one of those guns back if he tried. Like there was no way it was going to happen. I remember taking this very funny picture of the 6 guns like this, and then when I came back and did an after action for 11th Marines, I flashed this picture up. I go, oh, I don't know, a picture of 311's gun park somehow snuck into this thing. It's like a big funny thing, But yeah, I mean, all that equipment was destroyed, but we thermite grenades and everything and destroyed it all. So, but the minute we went into those cantonment areas, we were like in an area and people just started shooting at us. Just I think it was just because they just wanted to shoot at us. They weren't attacking us so much as they were just
entertaining themselves.
Yeah. There was a little bit of like an attempt to kind of thwart our taking over the cantonment area, but that, and then there was the a raid called the Bakar Arms Market raid, which was, and the Bakar Arms Market is still in existence today, I'm sure, but it's near the K4 intersection, which is where you see, like, anytime you hear of a bomb going off, or K4 was very close to where the Black Hawk Down thing happened too. There's this big market where you literally just go in, you could buy guns, and somebody gave the task force the order to go in there and take all the guns. Right.
Fuck, man, that's got to be a pit in your stomach when they're like, "Hey, you're going to the arms market to remove the weapons." Like, what?
You go to the arms market, and like this was another, like, one of those things where I caught myself and saying to myself, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like, to myself. And we were given. I was with Charlie 17, and the infantry platoon that I was attached to was given this mission to, like, drive in on this street with their Humvees and then dismount, because we were in, like, softback Humvees.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's basically like an administrative movement. And so we start driving into the thing, and as soon as you start driving into these markets, they just flood the streets, and you can't do anything. You can't move the vehicle. And then the platoon commander, I was with the platoon commander, he was like, "All right, let's go up and scout up and see what's going on." So this guy Andy Crabb, who I actually went to TBS with, so Andy Crabb and I were running up this street together. I've got, like, an M16 with, like, a couple mags in my pocket. You know, like, I didn't even have deuce gear on. I just jumped out of the vehicle.
Oh, really? You were slick?
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, and this is like the old school deuce gear, right? Like 2 canteens and the 3-round mags, you know.
Yeah.
And I just ran out because I was like, we're just gonna go forward like 100 yards, and, like, my deuce gear was, like, slung on the back of the seat, like I just didn't get it off in time. I had a flak jacket and a helmet on, and we're running up, and Andy just keeps running, right? And I'm like, I think to myself, I'm like, we're 150 meters away from our Humvee right now, and there's 2 Americans with a couple mags and an M16, 2 dumb officers standing here. Like, I'm like, Andy, dude, we got to go back. You know, like, there was this, like, that was a scary moment in my life where I felt like, holy shit, this is where,
like, if this goes south, I'm screwed right now.
Right, because it was a mob. It was all these people. So we eventually dismounted all the Marines and just kind of swept up through the Bakar Arms Market and just started taking weapons. People were selling them. We were just grabbing them like this,
Mm-hmm.
and running back to the Humvees and the 5 tons and throwing them up into the 5 tons, and then going back and getting more and everything. And
what kind of weapons were you guys finding?
AKs and old stuff. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, like, it's a lot of World War II, nothing modern and nothing in good shape. But, you know, AKs, basically, show me an AK that's inoperational and I'll fix it in 2 seconds, right? I mean, that thing is, you could do a lot to that thing and still have it work. And it was a disaster because we didn't even have maps. We didn't even have, like, real maps. We had, like, these old geographic survey maps or something, so nobody really knew where they were. It was crazy. It was such a disorganized sort of, like, go do this, now go do that, and go take this down, and you know, shoot this person. No, don't shoot that person. And it was, you know, like,
what a different time when now you look at, so, like, when I was in Afghanistan, you know, they almost won't let you drop a bomb I think that is right. I don't think they'd let you drop a bomb at all unless the commanding officer or higher has a UAV on site and can actually verify what you as the controller or FO on the ground is seeing. You know what I'm saying? It's like the command and control or the technology has allowed command and control to become micromanaged down to a level like that. You know, that could never happen where you're making a decision on the ground, especially if it's a decision to, like, hey, take out this vehicle or whatever, you know. And this is obviously a conflict. I'm talking about Afghanistan, where we were kind of settled in and there was, like, a routine going. You know, you're in, like, a new place, so it'd be a little bit more Wild West like. However, with the technology we have nowadays, it seems like, and the threat of, you know, accidentally bombing civilians, which is a huge thing, and it becomes a huge deal when it happens, as it should. It's just they want to get as high as they can to let that person say, yeah, it's okay to go ahead and do that now because, okay, it's on him now. You know, it's no longer on me if something bad happens. It's just it's a completely different environment.
We had a Huey, right? They had the command and control Huey that was flying at 2,500 feet or whatever it was, and some guys with binoculars looking down, and that was our aerial, you know, recon. But then the 10th Mountain started to come in, and as soon as the 10th Mountain Division started coming in, the Marines started rolling out. Mm-hmm. So we were out of there by March.
Were you guys there when the whole Black Hawk Down incident happened? Okay.
The Marines were gone. I mean, okay. I'm sure there were some, like, Marines that were attached as liaison officers to the 10th Mountain. I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't a single Marine in the country, but all the units were gone. The
Yeah.
MEU was gone. We were gone. And then the Marines didn't go back in there again until 1994 when the 13th MEU went in there. And they covered the withdrawal of the rest of the 10th Mountain Division and everything else that came back out to the ships, like the reversal of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And actually, kind of an interesting story. My roommate at the time, a guy named Greg Hallinan, he was the ANGLICO det commander on that 13th MEU. I think it was 13th MEU. And he and his ANGLICO team were the last ones off the beach.
Oh, cool.
Like that thick team sat there in an OP and like worked air and, covered everybody's ass as they were kind of coming off the beach and everything like that. So kind of a cool ANGLICO mission there.
It's similar to Vietnam. The Vietnam ANGLICO was the last unit out of Vietnam, last conventional unit that left Vietnam. There's a I didn't even realize that. I'd heard that.
Yeah.
But someone I knew was working up in Washington, and in the Pentagon, they took a picture of a plaque it's on a plaque in the Pentagon saying,
Wow.
First ANGLICO, Subunit 1, that was the last conventional unit out of Vietnam. I was like, oh shit, like that's cool. I'll have to find that photo.
I want to show you something real quick. I'm going to pull this off my wall.
Go ahead.
I'm going to tell a story about it. But that was basically the end of the Mogadishu thing. But hang on a second. Check this out. I have this in my house.
Oh shit! Were you the one that sent me the picture of that?
I must have been. Yeah, I have it. And then on the back is, I'm going to hold it up a little bit closer because it's really dark, but it's the hand drawn.
Oh wow!
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And that's on the back. So
how did you get that?
I'll tell you that story. So what ended up happening there was so the wrap up with Mogadishu was I submitted my fitness report to the commanding officer who was going to be a 1-star general, and I put on my fitness report that I was getting out. And he said, Dave, this is a combat fitness report. Like these, you put what you want to do after a combat fitness report. There's a really good probability you're going to get to do what you want to do. And I'm going to be a general. Like, tell me what you want to do that would get you to stay in the Marine Corps, and I'll do it. And because I had been spending so much time with Long Henry and listening to these ANGLICO stories about, shooting Volkswagen-sized shells off the, battleships and all this cool stuff that they did, I was like, if you can send me to ANGLICO, I'll stay in. And he's like, ANGLICO is a career killer for a Marine officer. And I was like, so is telling you on my fitness report I'm getting out. I mean,
yeah.
I don't, he's like, well, great point. All right. He goes, I'll make sure you get to ANGLICO. So I left Somalia, went back to 511, and was a fire direction officer in my battery and got orders to ANGLICO to report in 90 days. Like I was out in the field at a Desert Fire X combined CACs. And my battalion commander came down to me and said, hey, you got orders to ANGLICO, and this is going to kill your career. And I was like, again, sir, like, I mean,
why were they saying that though? Like, what's the thought process behind them thinking that was a career killer?
So I don't know if this is real or not, but this is what people said. So for an artillery officer, you do your time in the battery, right, which is really important, right? And Chris talked about that in his podcast about like, hey, if you're an FO the whole time, like if you don't have battery credibility, it's really tough. Like the artillery officer community can kind of eat their own a little bit on this stuff, and it's the tactical proficiency stuff. And so then it was commonly thought that in order to show that you were a well-rounded officer, your B billet had to be in something that was different. Right. So like recruiting or going to the drill.
Okay.
Those were like really popular things for officers to go do if they were really focused on getting a career, because they were like, okay, if you go do the shit that nobody wants to do, you'll get favorably looked upon by the monitor when it's time to figure out who are going to be battery commanders and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, I don't really care about that, because essentially your B billet was going to be staying in the fleet. So you're going to be like, fleet time as an officer at 511, fleet time in the office as an officer at 1st ANGLICO, and then I'd probably go to like the advanced course or something like that and then roll right into a battery command. So I wouldn't have paid my dues.
Which is such a ridiculous concept, that you are becoming a more well-rounded fire support officer, but it's being looked upon negatively. It's the same in the enlisted community, where they're like, if you're in a competitive MOS, they're like, hey man, you really need to go do a B billet as a drill instructor, or you can't go to the schoolhouse and be an instructor in your own MOS. You need to go be this. I never had to do that. 0861s don't really have that problem because so many dudes get tired and get out, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So the next thing you know is like, and I was sort of a layup to go to Anglico at the time because remember that story about how I had gone to jump school,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So Anglico was really excited. They're getting an artillery officer who's already jump qualified. Like, boom, this is awesome.
And what year is this?
93,
Okay.
May of 93. So I check in over at First Anglico, and at the same time, there is this like so Mogadishu got me to Anglico, right? General Klimp helped me out there, and that was great. And then I checked in, and I was a brand new lieutenant, and I feel like remembering people telling me like you're the first new lieutenant to come to Anglico in over a year, right? Like the artillery community was just not putting artillery officers at Anglico.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what I heard, right? So here we go. I heard that somewhere at a higher level than me, obviously, somebody said to somebody else, to the artillery community, you either start giving us good officers for the Anglico community, or we're just going to bring grunts in to do this.
Hmm.
And so anytime you tell an artillery guy that they're going to turn a job over to the grunts, that changes their perspective on everything, right? Because the ownership 9/10 of the law, right? Like, so all that stuff. So all of a sudden, 10 more brand new lieutenants show up like 3 weeks after I got there. And they were all my buddies. Like, I knew every single one of these guys, all of them. And all of a sudden, you've got this like group of lieutenants who all know each other, who all serve together, all the different battalions. We were all West Coast guys. And that unit just all of a sudden shifted because they got all this new blood in there and all these guys who like really loved artillery, fire support guys. And Anglico just became this like turnaround from what it was, which was like a place for like, like aviators who didn't really want to be facts went there, or anybody who just wanted to get gold wings and leave, right?
Yeah.
And that's where like the story of John Dillard happens, right? Because here I check in, here's John Dillard, and he had come out, he was a gunny at the time, maybe even staff sergeant. He had come out, he was the instructor down at whatever they call the Naval Gunfire School down at Coronado these days. I think he was like one of the instructors down there, and he got orders to Anglico, but he had been an Anglico guy his entire career. But I also think that he was a lat mover into 08612 too. Like, there's something, I may be wrong, and I don't want anybody to lop my head off for this. I feel like he did something else first. Regardless.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Dillard's like, all of a sudden he looks around and he's like, I fucking hate officers, but these 10 guys seem like they're kind of okay. and all of a sudden, like this little like circle inside of Anglico started up where all the guys who were really serious about fire supporting started creating like working groups and like tactical decision games and training and everything. And it completely inspired a community that was sort of like ho hum at that point. And that was a really great time. And the big thing back then in the 90s was being on the MEU, because that was the only way you were going to get out and do something. So you were either going to do JRTCs with your FIC team and your SALT team, or you're working up and deploying on a MEU.
JRTC is miserable for those that don't know.
Yeah. Joint Readiness Training Center at the time when I first came to Anglico was at Fort Chaffee, which I think is like Arkansas, and then they moved it to Fort Polk.
Yeah, I did one at Fort Polk with a 501st while I was at First Anglico.
Yeah, it was, and that was sort of like the history of the jump mission at Anglico, because like Anglico had this jump mission, right? And Chris said it really well in his, like, that's an insertion method. Like, it's no different than driving somewhere in a Humvee. Like, it doesn't, it's not like a FIC team is jumping into combat, right? The whole idea of having an airborne mission was to be able to support the global readiness force of the 82nd or the 10th or the 18th Airborne Corps, right? Like that was why we had a jump mission. So we could go post up at the green ramp with everybody else and be off wherever we needed to go. Unfortunately, people kind of like turned it into this thing that tried to make it look like Anglico was special through this jumping thing. And so there was the group of people who were like, hey, the jumping is something that we need to keep current on because we have a mission to do it with the 82nd Airborne. And then there are these people who are like, oh, we should be doing ramp jumps and water jumps and all this, like the cool jump club stuff, which Dillard had nothing. He didn't like that at all. But the thing that made Anglico really tough at the time was they hadn't figured out this whole JTAC thing. That term didn't exist. you were a forward air controller. And the only way that you could be a forward air controller per the MOS manual was to be an aviator. So they would send all of us to TACP school as artillery officers, and we'd get our logbook. At the time, it would be stamped school certified, not qualified, or something like that, right? So not qualified to control air, like right in your logbook. And so you couldn't check out a range, you couldn't schedule air, you couldn't do any of that stuff. You had to have an aviator actually do it. So now you've got a guy like Dillard who knows how to do air like the back of his hand, even way back then.
Yeah.
And like not allowed to do it unless he was with a pilot, right? And that made things at ANGLICO really tough to train, because you could have a FIC team, but you couldn't go out and do your mission unless you drug along some aviator. And it could be some guy just out of flight school. And if he's got wings, that's good enough. He can check the range out, So that was a difficult thing back in the day at ANGLICO. But the MEUs were a big deal back then. So back when you were talking about the MEUs, like the whole hierarchy on the ships and everything, like I lived that. I saw that too. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's weird. The other side of that coin, like from an officer's perspective on the ship, like we're taught as officers, like your men eat first. All this stuff, like take care of your men, no personal servitude, that kind of stuff. That stuff is drilled into you from the get-go. And then all of a sudden you're on ship and you're like, you're not eating with your Marines. You're not sleeping with your Marines. They're doing your laundry. They're getting pulled for these working parties. Your staff NCOs can't eat in the chief's bed. Like the whole culture just collapses on itself.
Yeah.
When you end up on these MEUs. And it was so, even as an officer, it was demoralizing. It was funny because you were talking before about like every now and then an officer would come down into the berthing area and check in and everything. Here's the opposite side of that from the officer's perspective is we're basically told when we're like told, hey, here's what shipboard life is like. The enlisted men do not want you in their berthing. Do not go down there. That is not your space. You are not welcome down there. I mean, they don't say it like that, but they're like, do not go down there and, crash their house.
Yeah. Right.
So it's funny because like on the other side of it, like we're taught like that's bad. That's not, they don't want you there. Right.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like you got to walk through a gazillion other units berthing area to get to there. Right. So that means everybody's getting out of the rack and saying good morning, sir, and all that kind of stuff. And like, so you're kind of taught as an officer, like, stay out of their space.
Yeah.
And it's weird because
I mean, and that's understandable. I do understand that, because it'd be like going to the barracks and hanging out. Like you're just not going to do that. But yeah. I do think because it is where you live like all the time and you're there all the time, that more people should come down and just kind of feel it out, because your berthing is as good as like your company gunny is going to give you. You know what I'm saying? Like if he fucks you over, like our first one I had on my first MEU, we had 110 or 117 people in my berthing area that did not have enough room for that many. We had people on the fourth rack, which is the overflow rack, where you're not, that's like a, you use it if you have to kind of deal. That was their rack. And because it was up there and it was the fourth rack, it doesn't have like the coffin rack where you can open up and store stuff. So they were using cleaning gear, like these weird, like almost high school style lockers that are against the walls that we were supposed to keep cleaning gear in. That became where they could store their stuff, like it was just, we had, like I said, like 110, 120 people, something like that. Three sinks, 2 toilets, and that was it. And 2 showers for that many people. You know what I'm saying? And no one fucking cared. And randomly we would get the headquarters company gunny or whatever his position was, come in and just like start pounding on the walls and like, I need a working party. And you're just like, dude, you're such a fucking prick. Like, let us know like what you need and we'll take care of it. Especially we're staff sergeants. We have staff sergeants in here because we have to live in here. And then it becomes, because you're a staff sergeant, and like we said before, you don't rate to go in the chief's mess. Well, you don't live with the staff NCOs either. You live with the East. It's all E6 and below in the same berthing. Right. So then you become the bastardized staff NCO. And I was a team chief. My first MEU, I was the first ANGLICO, detachment team chief, and I couldn't sit in on some of the planning and stuff that's happening because I wouldn't know about it. I'm not in the circle. I'm not eating chow with the people that are doing the planning. I'm not sleeping with the people that are doing the planning. I have to make an effort to go around and find out what's going on to keep in the loop of what's happening. Yeah. And it's just a mess, man. like I said, I never felt, I wanted to do a MEU. I was like, fuck, man, I went to Iraq once. I did Afghanistan twice. Like, I think a MEU would be cool, you know, maybe go hit some ports, get to drink some, like see the world kind of deal. And it wasn't that. And just, I just couldn't get over the way that people treated each other. And it got, I think it gets really bad when you start seeing some of the Marine officers or staff NCOs buying into why are you in this hallway? You know, like they start getting that, like, you know,
officers country.
Yeah.
Right? Like the sign that was
I worked in officers country. Yeah. I worked up there and people, I'd have Navy officers like, why are you walking down this P-way? I'm like, dude, I work right here in the SAC. You know, like
what class ship were you on? What were you on?
LHD both times. I was on the 11th MEU on the Macon Island.
Okay. So you were there with the air wing and everything,
the
right?
big deck. Yeah. I was on the big deck.
Big deck. Yeah. So my det was not. And so that was a really great scam of ours too. We ended up on our MEU. I was on the 11th. I was on the 31st MEU, which is kind of a MEU, and then I was on the 11th MEU, which is really a MEU. So, or back in the day, that's the way I thought of it. And I didn't have a staff sergeant on my det. Mm-hmm. So when we deployed, it was assault, a FIC, an aviator, and an artillery officer. And the aviator and the artillery officer could be flip flop between the SALTO and the FICO, right? Like there wasn't it wasn't like the aviator was the SALT and the artillery guy was the FIC. It just had to be one or the other because that aviator had to be there to control air. Mm-hmm. And then the SALT got plussed up with a corpsman and a parachute rigger and a motor T mechanic. So you had it was like 14 guys. So what ended up happening was we start working up for the MEU. I go to some planning exercise and somebody starts briefing that ANGLICO is going to go out to San Clemente and do a naval gunfire shoot. And this Navy SEAL guy comes over to me and says, "Hey, are you this ANGLICO thing?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Are you the one that's going to go out and do naval gunfire?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Can I send some of my SEAL platoon out there with you?" Mm-hmm. And because they need to do it for their promotion rates or whatever, like their checkoffs. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, "Oh God, a bunch of Navy SEALs out on San Clemente Island with me, right? Like, what is this going to be like?" And I said, "Look," I said, maybe. But here's the thing, like if your guys come out, I know how you guys are with your community. Like I get it. You call each other by your first name and you don't cut your hair and whatever. You wear civilian clothes out in the field. Whatever it is that you do, it's not Marine stuff. Like if your guys come out, they gotta obey my rules. Like helmets, flak jackets, like that stuff is gonna get me in trouble as the guy who's the OIC on the Hill. Like you gotta promise me your guys are gonna come out there and like be okay with kind of living by the Marines rules.
Yeah.
Because and this is what he said to me, like blew me away. His name is Jeff Engel. He's still a really good friend of mine to this day. He goes, "Dude, I wouldn't have it any other way." He goes, "And my guys would never come out there and have it be any other way." He's like, "I promise you nothing but the most unbelievably squared away professional SEALs out there. They want to come out and train. They want to learn from you." And they came out there. Dude, they were awesome.
That's cool.
They were awesome. And not only were they awesome, but they were like teaching my FIC Marines like, "Hey, you should rig your gear like this and you should like that kind of stuff was going on."
That's
right?
the good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the SEAL guys go back, and actually they brought an ensign out with them too. So those guys go back and they say to the SEAL platoon commander, like, "Hey, that ANGLICO det, they're pretty good." He's like, "Did you know that they can control air and like they have all the radios and they have SATCOM and all this stuff?" And they were like, Jeff, the platoon commander was like, I had no idea. So Jeff like drives up to Camp Pendleton one day to have lunch with me. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "what do you think about this idea?" He's like, when I take my SEAL platoon out on the ribs, there's 4 ribs. And when we get in the water, we do a hydro reconnaissance or we do a VBSS or we do a GoPlat takedown or whatever. Those boats are just sitting out there empty. And they've basically got a driver and an A driver, but there's 2 machine guns on it. And there's no one, they're operating the boat. So they're not like defending, they're not fighting the boat. Right. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the idea of taking your 6 guys and splitting up like 3 in this two boat section and 3 in this 2 boat section? So when we go in the water, we get off the boats, you're on the boats and you can man the 60s, you can call in air, you can call in naval gunfire, you can do medevacs for us. And the boat drivers can drive the boats because they didn't have SWIC back then. They were just sort of like special boat unit.
Yeah.
And so that didn't mean that they were really anything more than possibly just regular Navy dudes. And he's like, "What do you think of that idea?" I'm like, "Well, that sounds cool because I'm on the MEU and nobody knows what the hell to do with me anyway. Right? I'm not part of the BLP. I don't have anything to do." So we ended up like working this drug deal out where I basically like attached to the Navy SEAL platoon for the entire detachment. And because of that, we got to go to the MEU commander and say, hey, we need to be on the same ship as the Navy SEAL platoon. So we got off the Death Star and we got over onto an LPD.
Nice.
And life over there was just completely different than life on this big deck with a bunch of, like officers and bigwigs and the COs, like the captains and all. Like it was a little bit more of a laid back community. Like we wore UDT shorts and t-shirts and sneakers all day on ship, and because there was no air conditioning that worked, and life was a little bit better. The ship was smaller, so there wasn't that sort of like Navy rivalry. And our captain was a former ANGLICO
like no glow. Yeah.
No glow from Vietnam.
Oh,
right?
wow. Oh shit.
So he had a combat action ribbon and like all that stuff. So he was like, he loved the Marines.
He's like, welcome, brothers.
Right. And so my experience on that ship was completely different than what most other people's experience were. 'Cause we were on the small ship. We didn't get fucked with that much. The berthing was pretty good. The chow hall was small enough to where you didn't have the big long lines. And yeah, it was. So I think I was fortunate in that I wasn't on the big ship.
Every team now, they do it a little differently. You know, they do it based off of whatever they think they're going to be doing once they deploy. A lot of times you'll have a firepower control team on each ship, or you'll have one, there's 3 ships normally within the MEU construct, I guess. And so normally we try to spread load guys either to all 3, or if most of the BLT is on the LPD, then we would put the 2 fixed. Like for my first deployment, we put our 2 firepower control teams were on the LPD, and then it was me and the headquarters fict that I would create with my guys that were on the big deck, and obviously my captain and stuff like that. But yeah, that's cool. I mean, they don't really, not that I saw on my 2 deployments, but we didn't have any SEALs that were embarked on ship. I'm not sure if they still do that. We do still, or my team did, provide, actually I know of at least a couple teams that did it. We provide a JTAC. We provide a firepower control team, but they really just want the JTAC. To come over and work with the recon detachment as a fires officer to help them with fires planning. And then usually the JTAC will go out on the raid with them and stuff like that. So
yeah, we did some of that too. That was back when they had like the force recon platoon was basically the maritime raid force, but they also had the battalion recon. And I would do a little bit of like JTACing for them also, but only if the FAC from the BLT couldn't, like there was all that going on too. Like, and so the FAC and the air officer that were on the BLT, they didn't like me because I was sort of like competition for the job, like the work and all that kind of stuff. But
same. It was the same way with us on our first, on my first MEU.
And then I had to, and I think Chris said this also on your podcast, but like, and you and I were talking about networking yesterday too. So like when you're a unit with an operational ability and no real unit, you're not supporting anybody on the MEU because you're not on the BLT, right? So the BLT is not like, hey, let's bring the ANGLICO debt. Like you're there to do everything else, and nobody thinks about. So you have to find stuff to do.
For sure.
And that's what we did. So like when we went ashore in Kuwait and we trained at the Udari Range for 30 days, like I started wandering around Doha and I was like, oh, hey, look at this. There's a group of PJs here. And hey, here's 5th Special Forces group. And
like, hey, you guys want to do some work together?
Yeah. Right. Hey, I'm going to go out. I'm going to run, like the whatever aircraft carrier is in the Gulf. Like we're going to run some of the aircraft. You guys want to come out and do some quals? Oh yeah, man. Like, hey, I'm doing a jump. Anybody getting closer to your 90 days for your jump pay? You need to come out and strap hang on. Like, and the next thing you know, like we're making all these friends that have nothing to do with the MEU and getting all kinds of, hookups from them.
And then you get really depressed because you have to go back to the ship.
You have to go back to the ship, right? Yeah. And then you go back to the ship and you find out that they had like a big steak and lobster and beer day because the Marines weren't on the ship. So the Navy, said, fuck it, let's break out all the good stuff while the Marines are gone. And
we got lucky that first time I went to Kuwait. The ship stayed at sea for over 115 days. And we happened to get off right before that, before they got pulled. We went to Kuwait to go do a small exercise and ended up being there for like 3 months or something, or 2 months at least. And I was glad I missed out on that for sure. But what you were saying earlier about working with the SEALs and how they came out and they were, so from what I've seen, and I know there's other guys that have had negative like interactions with Navy SEALs during training exercises and stuff like that. But the guys that I've seen, when they come out and do something like that, where they're not the expert, like they come out and they're like, hey man, I know how to do a call for fire, kind of, but I'm not the expert. I think they do a really good job. They're professionals, obviously. And I think that drives them to just shut up and pay attention and to get advice. Like, they'll take advice from a Marine sergeant because he's the fire support expert here, and that was the kind of my interactions with those dudes when I would work with them doing stuff like that. They were just all about being there and learning and like, oh, you guys do naval gunfire too? Can we jump on one? Yeah. And it's which is super cool. And you give, like you said, they give their own little lessons learned back to the guys on different stuff like wearing gear, or it gives the guys an opportunity to peek behind the curtain and actually ask these guys about, different tactics or some of the stuff that they do and stuff like that. It's anytime you get to work with another group like that, especially a professional group like Navy SEALs or special forces stuff, it's always a good experience in my experience so far.
Yeah.
Or in my experience that I had. Go ahead.
I think the thing too that we have to remember as Marines is just because somebody's culture is different than ours doesn't make them less or worse than we are, right? So, look, Marines, we don't call ourselves by our first names that much, right? That's just a thing, but they do, right? They call their officers Dave and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not our thing, right? But it's their thing. But it doesn't mean that they're bad at their job. And so I went through this little bit of like growth and maturity phase and looking at those guys. And I'll lead with this. I'm sure that there are a million people out there that are listening to your podcast that are going to say like, I hate the Navy SEALs or blah, blah, blah. Look, I hold them in the highest regard for their professionalism and what they do and how they do it. And they've got bad apples just like we do. Mm-hmm. But my experience with them was top notch. And now they've got longer hair. They call each other by their first names. They run around with special boots. They don't blouse them, whatever. I don't care, right?
That's because they've all proven themselves to be mature, professional individuals that can get the job done. And I don't need to tell you to cut your hair because all that shit is all part of the good order and discipline that, gets That's people right. to listen. Well, we already know that they can listen and that they can do their job professionally, and they're going to come, they're going to come to work when it's time to come to work kind of deal,
Yep.
So they get those kind of little special privileges.
And I learned so much from those guys because, as an officer at TBS, and like you go through the orders writing process, like you learn how to write 5-paragraph orders and all of that stuff. Great. And then I sat in on one of their briefs and I was like, whoa, these guys are awesome. Cause they are down to like, at the time, they're down to like, this person's carrying the red smoke. This person's carrying the flashbang. And I'm like, we don't talk about any of this stuff in our 5-paragraph orders. We don't talk about any of that, PCI, all that. Like we weren't doing any of that at the time. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I have so much to learn from these guys. And then here was the really cool thing too. Like this is why I really, this was the moment when I started to hold them in really high regard, was they never took their culture and put it on me and my team. Right. So for example, they never called me Dave.
Oh, okay.
Never tried it. Never said my first name behind my back. It was nothing. They never did that. And they called all my Marines by their rank. And they were the mature ones, right? They were the ones who were like, hey, listen, this is how Marines do it. And maybe this was their officers kind of told them this, or their chiefs were like, hey, listen, this is just how they do it. So don't, just do it. And so what was really kind of cool was, okay, maybe they didn't stir it up as much as like the Lance Corporals do to me, like if I was a captain at the time, maybe, but they would do this. They'd be like, they would call me skipper, or they would say like, hey, captain, or like maybe they didn't stir it up all the time, but they never got like sideways with me. They never put me in a spot where I felt like I had to say something to them to bring them back into set. Like they never took advantage of that and in a way that would encourage my Marines to act like that too, right? There's
a mutual respect there.
There was, right. And so it was good. And we all really got along, and we did some great training together. We did some interesting like training missions together, went out with them on GoPlats, went out with them on VBSS, went out with them on Hydro Recons, like went out into the Udari Range with those guys. Like they drove us around on their ribs all the time. We did our crossing the line ceremony. They launched the ribs and we went across the equator with the SEAL team in their ribs.
Like I totally would have done that. That would have been a different experience for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet crossing the line ceremony was a lot different 20 years ago too, 20, 25 years ago.
the hazing stuff hadn't really hit. So like my formative years were things I remember were like the first female fighter pilot in the Navy. That was a big deal, right? And then I want to say like she may have crashed.
She did.
Yeah, and so I remember that. And then of course tailhook.
Yeah.
Right, like tailhook was smack in the middle of my like growing up as a lieutenant. That was a big deal.
Yeah. For those unaware of that, just Google tailhook incident.
It was that was a we had like Marine Corps wide stand downs. We were in the base theater listening to all this stuff, and that was a crazy time. All promotions were held up. Like you had to basically be proven that you weren't at tailhook, and like so even my promotion was held up for a couple months. Yeah, because they needed to like make sure that everybody wasn't at tailhook and all this stuff.
Jeez.
It was crazy. Yeah, and then it was the hazing. Then the hazing thing was a big deal too, because at First Anglico we would have a formalized winging ceremony where when you got your gold wings, you went up in front of the entire Anglico and you picked 10 people to come up and fucking blood wing pound those right in. And the CO and the sergeant major had to be 2 of the 10 people. Right?
Oh, really?
And like, I mean, so the rule was 1 corpsman, 1 rigger, CO, sergeant major, you get to pick the other 6 people. Right. And it was always a contest as to who could be the most brutal, especially on the officer. Right. So the riggers would do something called a rigger bite, where they would come up and they would take your wings. Of course, they have no backing on them, right?
Yeah.
And they'd fold them back into your tit and then bite on them. So not only were you getting that, but you were getting like a big bite mark on your tit. Like, I mean, it was, and this is like, people were filming it. People were, congratulations. The CO was out there. The CO punched your wings in. The sergeant major punched your wings in. And then all of a sudden, some video surfaced of one of the air delivery platoons or force recon or something, like this out of control winging ceremony.
I thought it was an Anglico. I thought that was an Anglico.
Well, Anglico had their ceremony, but the video wasn't Anglico.
Oh, okay.
That's how I remember it. I'm willing to be wrong on that. It's easily provable, but that's just how I remember. But they were doing this thing like where they put a helmet on somebody and use them as a battering ram and like that kind of stuff. But what ended up happening was, okay, if you only let 10 people do it, the minute you go back to the barracks, everybody else is going to do it too. So that's where it started getting bad, right? It was supposed to be like, here's the ceremony, so with the hazing, and then that put the kibosh on the crossing the line ceremony too. So when I did the crossing the line ceremony, it was before all the rules came down. So they would do these things called shillelaghs, and if you were a shellback, which means you've already crossed the equator, and you had your card to prove it, you could take a piece of like firefighting hose and like soak it in the salt water and let it sit out in the sun and get all hard, and they would turn it into like a SWAT.
Yeah.
And when you would walk on your hands and knees around the flight deck and they would just whale you in the ass with these things. And then the end of the ceremony, you had to crawl through garbage, you had to eat all crappy food. It was like Fear Factor, right? Like, with Rogan, making you eat, all kinds of shit. Who knows what's in it? And at the end, you had to go up to the biggest, fattest Navy chief that they had. His belly was greased with like Crisco, and they'd put an olive into his belly button. You had to go up and like pull the olive out of his belly button. Like, fucking disgusting.
That's fucking gross, man. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that, man. Like,
I know, yeah. And then here's the best part of it too. Like, talk about stuff that doesn't exist anymore. In the old days, we used to have. You had your SRB. Do you remember the SRB? The service record book. It was like your paper folder. It was your thing.
They've moved to online, but
it's all online, right? So you had this, and then the officers had called your OQR, your officer qualification record, and it was like, it sat in admin, and then when you left, you physically took possession of it, and you went to your new unit, and you put your OQR down, and it was like, it was your official record of everything you've ever done, every award you've ever had, and if you ever lost that thing, all your documentation's out the door. Mm-hmm. So that's where your page 11 entries would go. So, you can get page 11 entries for doing good things too. Like you get a page 11 entry if you got issued a pair of desert boots, you get a page 11 entry saying you got issued desert boots.
Yeah.
When you became a shellback, you got a page 11 entry that said, hey, you are officially a shellback, whatever. My page 11 entry has this graphical drawing down the side of 2 bare-breasted mermaids with nipples and everything.
Yeah.
Like, that was my certificate. And I look at that, I'm like, could you imagine that these days?
I think it still is that.
A naked mermaid in your record book?
Oh, like, not in your record book.
Tits and everything. I mean, yeah, and it was crazy.
The certificates are pretty cool to see, I will say. Like I said, I think they're really cool, and it's something I had read about. And my dad was in the military. My dad was in the Army. And I was just like a military nerd, I guess, when I was a kid. I would read stuff about it and watch stuff. And it's something I knew about. And I was like, oh, this would be cool if we get to do it, you know? And then just, like I said, my disdain of just being on ship and being around some of the worthless people that I was around and how they treated people just kind of turned it off for me. And I'm like, fuck these dudes.
Well, I'll tell you this.
But there's still a lot of good Navy people out there. Don't let me say that it's all Navy people are bad, but there are quite a few that are bad.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this. Here's a highlight to the rest of your life. This is how much my certificate of crossing the line means to me.
Yeah.
Right. 0. I mean, someday you're not going to care about that. I don't care about it. I like the story, but that's it.
I think it's cooler that I have a shotgun on the wall that has Operation Enduring Freedom engraved on it and has my advisor team logo on the buttstock, you know? Like, that's a cooler thing.
Stuff. Yep.
You know?
That's the stuff you'll covet forever. My most prized I Love Me wall thing is, so, all my plaques, that's all gone. That's all in a box, all that stuff. I've scanned the pictures and everything. The thing that I have not taken down off my wall yet is the Mike Battery 314 guidon framed with all my Marines signed around the edge of it,
Yeah.
And that's one of those things, like when you get that and the Marines have like written you notes on the side and everything about it, that's when you look back and you're like, that's special. So that stays on the wall. But everything else has been kind of boxed up in my life, all the plaques and stuff.
You got to think about taking that first ANGLICO sign you have there, send it over to the Eagle's Nest.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because we got sidetracked there. So yes, I was supposed to be out there in May to do. I never had a retirement ceremony. I've got 2 or 3 other friends that are. My whole peer group just went to 30 in May. So we were commissioned in 1990, right? So all my friends that stayed in and didn't get promoted to general were all getting out this May. And so I was like, well, I never had a retirement ceremony. I'll cut my hair, put my uniform on. I'll do it too.
Nice.
They can all get their Legions of Merit, and they can go online and get me the Cold War medal and give me that as a joke, whatever.
Yeah.
But, so, like the retirement ceremony. And I kind of feel like I really wish I'll tell this to the listeners too. Like, I think there's this point where, like, when you want to get out and if you're eligible for a retirement, you say, like, I don't want to have a retirement. I'll tell everybody, like, do something, right? Maybe you don't want to have the parade and make all the Marines march by and all that kind of stuff, but, like, do something. Get together with your buddies, like, put some closure to your career. I didn't have that closure to my career. My retirement, I found out that I was retired when I came home one day and there was a manila envelope in the mail that says, here's your retirement certificate. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, really didn't like that very much. And so anyway, I was supposed to go out there in May, and ANGLICO knows I have this. So I worked, I don't know who the CO is right now, but whoever I was working with them, I was going to bring that over to the Eagle's Nest because I've never been to the Eagle's Nest. It didn't exist when I was around.
Mm-hmm.
I was pre-ANGLICO before they rolled the flag and got rid of it. And this needs to go back to them. I have no intention of keeping this whatsoever. I actually, on Facebook, I got into an ANGLICO group and I said, does anybody know the history behind this sign? And I finally found a Vietnam vet that showed me a picture of that thing. That is the sign that hung in front of the CP tent in Da Nang, where that was their thing.
Yeah.
And showed me a picture of him standing in front of it. And it's dual-sided because it started out as somebody hand drew it, and then they turned it around and made it a little bit brighter and better.
Yeah.
But that was hanging in our old CP when I went to ANGLICO. We were over at Del Mar at first, over near Sharky's, like the
I've heard about that.
Yeah. So it was over there, and there's this iconic picture of First ANGLICO where, like, it's the picture of the roof where it says ANGLICO on it, and there's spy riggers coming across it. It was a popular picture from way back in my day. That was our old CP. It was like a World War II kind of like one level wooden structure with a porch on the front. And they moved the CP from Del Mar to, and I'm not sure exactly where ANGLICO's CP is now.
It's in Flores.
Ours was too, is in Flores. I was looking at a picture. I was looking at Google today trying to figure out, like, I don't know if it's in the exact same building, but when they got rid of it, we went to this building. It used to be Force Recon's building. Force Recon moved across the street into this like gated area next to what was our motor pool. We shared the Paraloft together. And then when ANGLICO went away, Force Recon moved back into that building. But I think ANGLICO is back in that original building, like a one-story kind of structure. I'm not really sure.
Right next to the road, yeah. It's like one of the last buildings on the right-hand side in Las Flores. And then right, like probably a few months before I got there, they opened it up they built a new building for all the teams. So it's the brigade building. So you go over there, and coming from 10th Marines, I went over there and I'm like, Jesus, look at this place. I would walk in, and I have my own cage for all my equipment. Like, you don't have to take gear home and shuttle it back and forth, because you have your own cage inside your team room that you can lock. Like the firepower control teams had their own little work areas. We had a classroom. Like, it was super nice. I was like, that's awesome. Living good over here. Yeah, it was. So
we had everybody in what you just called the brigade building.
Yeah.
Right. Like, conference room in the middle, hallway went around the outside, and it was that. I don't know if the roads are still set up like this, but when you came in and you drove, the building was on the right-hand side, and if you kept going up was where all the tanks were on the left.
Yeah. If you come up that little side road, if you come off the main road off that side road, yeah.
Yep, that was it. So,
and then at the top of the hill is LAR, and now Recon has their CP up there too, and then MARSOC is on the left side.
Right, and 511 used to be there too.
Okay. Yeah, they're out in Polgus.
Right in the middle of the base where like the chow hall is and the gym is. Like that was 511. They were like, actually, like, they lived in squad bays. It was really shitty. So it was the old first tanks CP, because third tanks went away. First tanks moved up to 29 Palms. 511 went into first tanks stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I was out on a MU at the time, and my buddy, his name's Jay Manley, he was the logistics officer at First ANGLICO, part of that whole group of lieutenants that all came in at once. And Jay was in charge of moving the CP from the old building to the new building. And he tells the story, he's like, there was something in the back of my mind that made me want to go over and do one more walkthrough of the old CP before they tore it down. He goes, so I went over there on the day that they were starting to bulldoze it. He's like, I wanted to take a picture of the CP as the bulldozers were coming in. And he goes, and I decided to just walk through the CP one more time to make sure that there wasn't anything in there. He goes, and thrown off in the corner, buried in a pile of like trash, was that sign.
That's crazy.
I know. And he's like, oh my God, this is like, how can this have been left here?
Yeah, no shit.
So he picked it up and he took it, and he was like, well, fuck it. If the command didn't move this thing and they don't want it, I'm keeping it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he had it forever. And then a couple years ago, he was moving to Hawaii, and he was like, hey, I'm paring down my shit. I've had this thing in my basement. It's kind of junky. It doesn't go anywhere in my house. Do you want it? I was like, fuck yeah. Not because I want it, because I want to go back to ANGLICO, because I heard about this Eagle's Nest thing and everything. So,
Sergeant Merritt built the Eagle's Nest right before he got out.
Yeah. And what is it? So can you tell old guys like me what the Eagle's Nest is and what it exists for, and like,
so they took
really a bar?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So they took an office. So when the building was first built, I think they're under warranty, right? There's a certain amount of time where it's under warranty. You can't do anything to it. And there is enough space there for, I want to say there's enough offices to have at least three, if not four brigades, right, to be working out of there. And we don't have 3 or 4 brigades right now. I think, or we didn't when I was there. ANGLICO was at like 165 people, right? There was 2 brigades, 4 teams. And so we had this extra office space that just kind of got rotated. Like if a reservist ANGLICO was coming in to do some training, we'd let them use it or whatever. And I think they decided, they're like, hey, we should build an Eagle's Nest, like just kind of like a heritage room / bar, like whatever. And so they told Sergeant Merritt, he was working in the S3, I think he was just kind of treading water until his EAS came up. All right, hey man, here's a little bit of funding, and just build a bar, just build it. And he built, they took the cages out. I think they left one cage in that they could put bottles of liquor in so that people wouldn't come in there and take it, but they took all the cages out. They did some kind of fundraiser. And I know a lot of guys donated money, and they bought tables and chairs. And I want to say the chairs have people that were killed, or people wanted to memorialize. I think they put a little plaque, a little brass plate on each chair. I want to say that's how it was. I'm not 100% sure. But then he built a bar, like a full like L-shaped bar. And then he took the bar top. How he made it was, they went around and they're like, hey, if anybody wants to put anything on the bar top, go ahead and do it, like your combat patch or maybe a chevron or something. Because they put it all down, and then he put epoxy over it.
Oh, cool.
So it's all chevrons and people's patch from their flak jackets and challenge coins and just stuff like that. And it's all underneath the top of the bar, underneath the epoxy. And I know we would go in there, and me and my officers and some of the officers from the other team, sometimes we'd go in there and just crack a beer and talk about planning for, an upcoming training event or something like that. But you also have people that do their hell and farewells in there. Like we'll do like a formal hell and farewell for like the entire unit, kind of do something like that. And then, they always do like an officer one off to the side, later on or whatever, officer and staff NCO. People do retirement ceremonies in there. Like, yeah, it's just a good spot. And I think the unit had a beer pong tournament. It was a unit sanctioned like beer pong tournament, try to get some money for the Marines and stuff. That ended badly. One guy got a DUI, so I don't think that was good for the CO. But yeah, it's just and there's uniforms on the wall. I know Merritt left his alphas. He put that on the wall, and like one wall was like total cami netting. People have come back. So I was there when it was first made, so they were still trying to figure it out, like what exactly they want to do. And I know some guys are being more deliberate about what they're doing than others, to try to keep it like clean looking, but, proving the point. But, like me, I actually I was emailing back and forth with the CO from First Anglico the other day. He's talking about some of the shirts he wants to get. And I was like, yeah, I got to make it up there sometime, and I want to I have a team photo that we took in Saudi Arabia that I want to bring up there and hang up on the wall sometime. And he's like, yeah, you're invited anytime, come by and do it. And if you go in there now, I'm sure there's even more, but I know when I left, there was other guys had done that. Other guys had come back and, they brought a team photo with them from when they were in, something cool, and they just hang it up and, it's there for however long it's there. And yeah, it's a fun time. We did, we would go in there and do the call sign ceremony. I know we did that before, whatever it's called. I can't remember the name, the exact, something court, K court. We go in there and do the K court, so everybody gets their call signs that didn't have one already. But yeah, it's a cool spot. And it's right there in the compound. It's inside of the brigade area. It's in the fenced in compound. So you can literally like, hey, get some guys together, let's walk down here and have a couple beers and just kind of bullshit about this op that's coming up next week or whatever.
See, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a cool spot, and it's one of those things. As long as people don't, abuse the privilege of having it there. I know for a little while they had talked about keeping beer on tap all the time, and the unit funding it and allowing the OOD basically designating that as another like kind of duty billet, like you're like the bartender. And then like on Fridays or in the evening times or just on the weekend, having it open so guys don't have to go out in town and drink. They can just walk over to the Eagle's Nest and go in there and have a couple beers. And then the OOD secures it at the end of the night. And then, whatever money is raised off of that goes back into the unit for like, unit ball and stuff like that. I don't know if they ever did anything like that, but it's a cool spot for sure. And it's when you go in and you see pictures of guys in Iraq and, guys in Afghanistan, and it's all stuff you can relate to. And the building is really cool. When you go in the building, they took old ANGLICO photos from like Vietnam, and they took some from OEF and stuff like that, and they blew them up. So they're like 5 feet tall or maybe taller.
Oh, wow.
And so you're walking down the hallways and you just have these big ass photos of dudes, working, just doing regular fire support stuff. And so I think that's a really cool, whoever designed it and all that was already done when I got there. The Eagle's Nest wasn't built yet, but the offices and the pictures and all that was done really well. And I think it's a cool way to honor, I guess, the guys that had been there before. I think when they built it, they reached out, like whoever the sergeant major was, it might have been Offutt, reached out and was like, hey, old dudes, send me any cool photos you have from like old school ANGLICO stuff. And that's kind of how they got all that stuff together. But yeah, it's a cool spot.
I've got a bunch of like our unit photos from when I was there, like everybody in their Charlies, like that kind of thing.
That's and, like, the first unit I've ever been to that did that. I showed up there and I was there for like a week. Hadn't even been there a week. And they're like, hey, man, just keep your alphas ready. We're doing a unit photo next week. And I had never been in a unit that did a unit photo up until that point. I was a staff sergeant too. Like we took group photos, like, but this was like an actual, like, hey, unit photo in uniforms. And then you can buy the photo. And I have two of them. I actually got to take 2 unit photos there. which I'm glad, I'm glad they do something like that. And I think it's,
Yeah.
when you see all the old ones, because it's the same style of photo that's been
Yeah.
being taken
Everybody
for years.
like up on the bleachers and like,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's just like, it's cool to see it. You know what I'm saying? It's cool to see like I don't know, it's just like a tradition kind of deal. It's just another one of those things. I kind of wish other units did, but I mean, the pride of being at ANGLICO is different than a lot of other units because people, I don't know, it's just such a tight knit community because I think because you get more leeway to make your own decisions and stuff like that, and to train how you want to train or how you see fit. I think you get a lot more leeway, and you're just gone training and doing stuff so much that everyone gets really close to each other within your team. I didn't know that many people from the other teams, and there was only 4 teams, but there was guys I didn't know their name just because either we were gone or they were gone, but as a whole, the community is really tight. And, I had a really good group of guys at 10th Marines when I was with the liaison section there. And that was probably the other group of guys that we were really tight. But as a unit, as 210, it wasn't like that. Not really.
Yeah.
Not to the same level that we had there, but it's hard, it'd be hard to replicate something like that in a larger unit.
It's a great unit. It's funny because when I was a lieutenant, one of my roommates was an artillery guy, and when we all went to ANGLICO, he went off to recruiting duty, and he kind of like busted our chops about going to ANGLICO and all that stuff, and he went off for recruiting duty and all that stuff. Well, the karma had it. He came back and became the CO of First ANGLICO back. I don't know, 6, 7, 8. His name is Matt Cooper. He kind of came in. There was the reactivation of First ANGLICO. Mitch McCarthy stood it back up, and Mitch was a lieutenant with me. He and I were lieutenants together in 511, and he was like old school artillery guy, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. Like, Mitch is one of the greatest guys I've ever met in my entire life. I wouldn't have picked him to start ANGLICO back up, which means he's probably the perfect guy to start it back up, right? Because like he was a no bullshit kind of like artillery guy, like very hardcore, no sense of humor at all about anything, just like very serious dude. Not that he didn't have a sense of humor, just very serious dude, right? And then I think Matt Cooper came in after that, and he was the CO for a while, and he took the whole company over to Iraq, and then Mike Gann came in. And then I kind of lost it because that ended up like my group had kind of already come through there. But when they brought ANGLICO back, I was just really happy. And Matt told me, he was the guy that gave me a hard time when we all went to ANGLICO, and he's like, "Oh, fucking ANGLICO, fucking jump club, blah blah blah." He came back. He's like, "I eat those words every single day." He's like, "That was one of the best commands I was ever affiliated with. I'm so proud that I got to spend some time in ANGLICO." And so it's a special place. It's not that ANGLICO is special. It's just like we're not special. We're just different. We have a different sort of like community and culture that's awesome.
Well, like I said, it's an experiment to where they they put into action the whole, corporals are the backbone of the Marine Corps. Sergeants, NCOs are the backbone of the Marine Corps. Like our corporals and sergeants there had so much responsibility, especially if you were like a comm chief or something like that. You're talking about my Sergeant Flores, when he was my comm chief, that dude was in charge of I don't even know how much money, like comm gear, like well over $1 million for sure. We had enough radios to, support what we were supposed to support plus some. We had so many radios. We would make the BLT guys and stuff jealous because of the stuff, like the amount of capabilities that we would bring as such a small team. But I think that giving you the tools to do the job, but also giving you the free reign to be able to decide how you're going to prepare for whatever your mission is a reason that ANGLICO is the way it is, and that people like being there because you're putting into action the whole, small unit leaders and stuff like that, and letting them do their thing. And then the other thing also is the amount of pilots that are at ANGLICO make it so easy to go get aircraft. Like, hey, let's call up this squadron, or they would just call us up and be like, yeah, and I don't know how many times I went TAD for like 1 day or 2 days just to drive over to Yuma, do some urban cast with them, meaning I drove around Yuma and I would do sim cast with Harriers that were flying around above me, and I did that a few times, and it's like we were almost like yes men, like or I was for sure. Like they're like, hey Kramer, what do you got going on at the end of the next week? You want to go do this? I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Like I was all about it. I loved going out and going to different places and controlling different areas, and And you just don't get that. I mean, even when I was at 10th Marines as a JTAC, most of your time there is, if you're getting controls, you're chasing your requirements that you have to check, and a lot of your controls are from like OP3 or OP5 or OP4, and you're doing a TACP shoot. You're up there with, whatever infantry battalion you're attached to for that day, and they got some lieutenant that's trying to tell you what to do, and you're just like, what are you doing? What are you talking about, dude? Like, you're the fire. You're supposed to be the, pseudo fire support officer, but you're learning. You don't even really know anything. So it's just a different environment. But they're both fun, man. It was all great.
Yeah, it was. Anglico was just such a great time, and you're right. Like, the thing about communication was, here was the thing, and I'm sure it's still like this now, but like, you send an Anglico det somewhere, they're talking. Like, like comm was taken so seriously at an Anglico det. Like, there was never an excuse for not having comm sub, and everybody took such pride in comm. Like, it was great. So like, I remember a couple times, every time the FIC team went out, we would take what was then called the Prick 104, which was the HF radio, right? And we brought all the field expedient antenna gear and everything in. Like, when we were sitting around at OPs and we had nothing to do, we're setting up the 104 and we're trying to talk as far as we can, find any Mars station out there. Like, we were always talking. And anytime we went anywhere with the MEU, like, they knew if we were going in somewhere, they would have comm with us. Like, it was such a source of pride for us to have comm. And like, I remember times when we were out on the OP with our 104 and one unit, the ship at the MEU couldn't talk to the infantry battalion or whatever. And I'm like basically the comm retrans for them, because I've got HF set up with the ship and I've got VHF set up with the BLT, and like, we're saving the day out there because we can talk everywhere we go. And I'm sure it's no different now. I'm sure
100%.
Yeah.
Some of the best radio operators I've ever worked with were at Anglico. Flores is probably the best, radio operator I had. He was one of those guys that, like, if he didn't understand it, he sought out the information to understand it. We didn't need to send him to Mountain Comm, to go learn HF, because he learned it on his own. Like, he figured it out, and he would be out there making field expedient antennas and stuff. I got there and they're like, hey, we just a couple months ago, we were just out in Idaho. We did an unamped, HF shot back to Camp Pendleton, off a field expedient antenna. And I'm like, dude, okay, that's sick. Not my guys at 10th Marines weren't going to be doing that. And that's no fault of their own. They're just not something they would be exposed to. Whereas Anglico, the expectation is that you are going to be like one of the best communicators out there. And like you said, comm's not going to be down. You have no excuse to have comm down when you have the best comm equipment in the Marine Corps at the time. Like, Anglico always had like the top comm equipment for the most part.
Right.
It's just it's just a different world, man. But I'd love to talk to you about it more, but we're at almost 3.5 hours.
I know, dude. I can't believe we talked this long. I hope I didn't ruin your day out there.
Oh, no, you're good.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
No, it's good, man. I know you wanted to talk about the Marine Corps Museum, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely want to talk about the Marine Corps Museum. So the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, which is the actual organization that runs the Marine Corps Museum, I'm a newly elected member on their board of directors. And I've gotten some insight into, how the Marine Corps Museum is running and what's happening there. And one of the things I really realized was that I don't think that I don't think a majority of the Marines, present or past, have come to the museum. And so I meet people over and over again. I'm like, hey, have you been to the museum? Have you been to the museum? And they say no. And I'm like, I'm shocked, because that Marine Corps Museum, like, I'll say it like this, like, Marines, that is our cathedral. Like, that Marine Corps Museum is our cathedral. And I think, given the way Marines do everything, on a shoestring budget anyway, your thought would be like, well, how impressive could this thing be, right? And I'm telling you, like, this museum is on par with like something like the Holocaust Museum. Like, you would think that the Marine Corps Museum would be like an old Quonset hut with a rusty Amtrak from World War II in front of it with a red painted sign that says "Enter here," right? Like, it's not. I mean, this is a over $100 million like facility. It's insane. And a lot of the funding that keeps this thing going, because it's not owned by the Marine Corps. So the Department of the Navy owns the dirt, but the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation owns and operates the building. And so that is all operated by donations that are made to the Marine Corps Museum. And so
Mm-hmm.
you would think like, well, it's this huge $100 million facility. Like the donations that are running that thing are the, really wealthy Marines, like, Bob Parsons, who's got PXG golf clubs, and like, people like that. Like they're probably donating millions and millions of dollars, and that's what's floating it. It's not. It is the grassroots fundraising that's done, like the people that send in $5 or the people that buy a brick, or like, it's amazing how much that funding is going towards keeping our cathedral, not only keeping it in such as a world-class facility, but growing it and building it out as well. So a couple like plugs is, one, if you're ever in the area in Quantico, make sure you go to the Marine Corps Museum. You don't need to go on base. It's off base. You don't need to go through a gate or anything like that. But I'm telling you, it's one of those places where it's like this podcast. You walk into it and 3.5 hours later, you're like, where the hell did time go? Like
Yeah.
it's so amazing. It's also a great place to take your family, your kids, your wives, your parents, if they want to understand a little bit more about what your life was like as a Marine, because you can see the things in there, and they've got the whole section with the making of the Marines, and they can like put on a pack that weighs, they could put the pack on and see how heavy it is, and there's a
Yeah.
pull-up ball, all that kind of stuff. But then they have like the legacy walk, which is sort of like the way to do like the Clark Griswold visiting of the Grand Canyon. If you want, you just kind of walk the legacy walk and look around. You could do it in 20 or 30 minutes and kind of get an idea. But then you can also like jump into these exhibits,
Mm-hmm.
and they're amazing. So right now, what they've got is they've got the Marine Corps Museum built out with all of the exhibits up to what they call like 1976.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go in there, you can go into the World War One exhibit, the World War Two exhibit, Korea, Vietnam, and then some, some of the later part of the 70s. But they're all, every single mannequin that's in there is actually built by some actual Marine standing there and being sculpted by an artist.
Oh,
So
really?
like
Huh.
face is an actual Marine who stood there and got like sculpted for the thing. And if you when you go into like the Korean War exhibit, they've got the air conditioning pumped down really, 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 really low, so you get that feeling of what it was like to be cold. And then when you go into the Vietnam exhibit, you're walking off the tail end of a 46, and like you're in a mortar pit, and they've got the humidity set to like 100%, and the heat is cranked up, and you feel like you're in that environment. And then to be able to go through and see all those things, it's just amazing. But what's happening now is they're constructing the post 1976 part of the exhibits, and that's going to be like Gulf War, OEF, OAF, Somalia, anything after 1976 essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not open yet. They're building it. And unfortunately, the opening of it has been pushed off a little bit because some money that the Marine Corps was supposed to give the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation to finish that up had to get redirected to rebuild the barracks after the hurricanes down in Camp Lejeune a couple years ago. So it's been delayed a little bit, but I've gotten to go back there and see what those new exhibits are going to look like. And I am blown away, man. Like they have the actual F-18 that was part of a reserve squadron that was based out of Andrews Air Force Base on the day 9/11 happened. And that actual F-18 that is hanging in there, it's like hanging like nose up. It's unbelievable. Was the actual aircraft that was the first one to fly a cap over DC during 9/11. So that's the actual aircraft. They put it in the museum. They have an M60 tank for the Gulf War, like coming over the berm, like an actual M60 tank. They've got an LAV in there from Desert Storm, and man, they've got a 9 or 8 in there. They're putting it together, and it's just amazing. But I think the thing that may resonate with a lot of your listeners is they've got a section where they built like an exact replica of a city block in Fallujah. And I wasn't in Fallujah. I don't know what it looks like. I've seen pictures, but I got to see it, and it was amazing. And so what they want to do is they brought a bunch of Fallujah vets back and asked them to look at it and say like, hey, is this capturing the essence of what you encountered? And they were like, there were guys that just lost it, right? Like got transported back in time and like were just immersed in it. And so much so that there was so much emotion that was evoked out of that the architects figured out, and the people who run the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, the CEO. It's Major General Jim Kessler now, but it was Rusty Blackman before that. What they figured out was that they needed to repurpose what they had as a bathroom into like a facility for people to go and collect themselves if they get upset, because it's evoking that so much emotion. Like I looked at it and I felt like could have burst out in tears. I wasn't even there yet, because it's just like there's so much power to that exhibit. So it's coming, and your cathedral is being built out to honor this generation Marine, and a way to bring your family in and see it. Not only that, but it's great for things like weddings and retirement ceremonies. And it's just, you walk into this thing and you will never believe that the Marine Corps could have put something together like this. So just really want to encourage the Marines of the OEF, OAF generation to know that there is something there for you that's a little bit behind schedule. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's an amazing facility. It is definitely our cathedral, and I just want to encourage everybody to support it however they can, and if not support, at least make an effort to go see it and take your friends and family there, because you will be blown away.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I've only heard good things about it. I haven't been able to go see it. I wish I would have taken the opportunity while I was stationed on the East Coast to go up and see it right after it opened, because that's when, about the time I was there, was after it had opened, or when it had just opened and stuff like that. But no, I think that's great, and I think that people of the different eras probably appreciate the specific like acknowledgement of the conflict or whatever it was, or era that they were in. And I told my buddy about it. You mentioned this yesterday, and I told my buddy, Michael Hanthorne, I had talked about earlier in the show, that was in Fallujah, about it. And he's the same way. He wants to get up there sometime, so maybe him and I will plan a trip up there and go check out the new exhibit once it gets open and everything. And if you send me the information about how people can donate or any kind of thing like that, I'll throw it in the show notes, and that way people can do that. If they don't go through the show notes though, is there a website or something they can go to?
Yeah, so it's Marine Corps Heritage. If you just Google Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, it'll come up, and there's some pretty good stuff in there. They've got actually really interesting too that everybody should know about. They have a new theater that they just opened up there called Medal of Honor Theater, and it's like a big IMAX theater that's in the museum. And they have a movie that was made and narrated by Gene Hackman called "We the Marines," or "The Marines Are We," or something. I'm so sorry, I'm slaughtering the name.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but and it's an amazing IMAX thing. But since the Marine Corps Museum is closed with COVID right now, they've actually put the video up on Netflix and somewhere else also, like Vimeo or something, or Vimeo. I get that and the pay thing mixed up. So, but you can watch that movie, and it's actually really well done. It goes everything from like the creation of a Marine all the way through like a MU deployment, and like I said, it's narrated by Gene Hackman, so the cinematography is fantastic. It's a very powerful movie, and so if you go to the museum, make sure you watch it in the IMAX theater, because that's an experience. But if you also know that it is up on Netflix right now for everybody to see, because they just want to make sure that Marines are watching that.
Oh, that's cool. I'm sure some people will check it out. And I appreciate you coming on and telling your story, man. And we'll have to come on some other time. You have to get into some of your other like ward stories or training stories and stuff like that. And maybe we'll get some feedback from the audience, and they may have some questions for you in the future.
Yeah,
but
especially if somebody wants to hear the other side of my story about how I went into the reserves and had a whole career in the reserves too, and like the pros and cons of being either an enlisted Marine or an officer in the reserves. How I hated it and then grew to love it.
Yeah.
So that could, if there's interest in that, and people put in the show notes, say they want to hear somebody talk about what life in the is like in the Marines, in the reserves. I was at 4th ANGLICO and artillery batteries too, so I'm happy to talk about that too.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I do want to acknowledge, I should have done this at the beginning, but today, as we're recording this is the anniversary of D-Day, so shout out to, I don't know how many of those dudes are still left alive, but man, what a crazy experience to live through that. And obviously we all owe a lot to those guys, so shout out to those dudes.
We definitely do. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, have a good weekend, man. And
too, man.
This will be up on Monday.
Awesome. Great talking to you, and reach out anytime, especially if you come down to the museum. I'll make sure that I'm there personally for you.
For sure. I appreciate that.
All right, Justin. Hey, thanks again.
Hey, you too. Have a good one.
Bye.